In the fading light of a Scandinavian evening, when the sun begins its slow descent behind the ancient mountains that have stood sentinel over these northern lands for countless millennia, there comes a particular quality of quietude that modern ears have forgotten how to hear. A silence so profound and complete that it seems to wrap itself around the scattered settlements like a blanket woven from the very fabric of time itself. The great fjord, which during the day had sparkled with the brilliant blues and greens of glacial water catching sunlight, now transforms into something altogether different, becoming a vast mirror of darkening silver that reflects not just the dying light of day, but also the first tentative stars that dare to show themselves in the deepening vault of the sky above. Along the shores of this primordial waterway, where the land meets the sea in a dance that has continued since the world was young, stands a longhouse of the Viking people, its distinctive shape rising from the earth like a great overturned ship, which indeed it resembles in both form and function. For these structures were designed by a seafaring people who understood that the same principles that kept a vessel safe upon the waves could shelter a family through the long northern nights. The walls, constructed from massive timbers that were already ancient when they were felled, have weathered to a color somewhere between grey and brown, a hue that speaks of countless seasons endured, of summer suns and winter storms, of the patient accumulation of years that transforms mere wood into something approaching permanence. As the light continues its inevitable retreat, casting longer and longer shadows that stretch like dark fingers across the landscape, the inhabitants of this dwelling begin the timeless rituals that mark the transition from day to night. Rituals that their ancestors have performed for generations beyond counting. Each movement and gesture refined by centuries of repetition into a kind of unconscious poetry. Through the smoke hole at the apex of the roof, a thin column of grey rises into the evening air, carrying with it the scent of burning birch and pine, mingled with the earthier aromas of the evening meal that has just been consumed, a hearty combination of salted fish, root vegetables, and dark bread that sits warm and satisfying in the bellies of those who now prepare for sleep. The master of the household, a man whose weathered face tells the story of 40 winters survived and 40 summers laboured through, moves with deliberate slowness as he banks the central fire, carefully arranging the glowing embers so that they will continue to provide warmth throughout the night, without consuming too much of the precious fuel that must last until spring returns to these northern lands. His movements are practiced and economical, each gesture the result of knowledge passed down from father to son through more generations than anyone can remember. For in this world where the margin between comfort and catastrophe is measured in armloads of firewood and handfuls of grain, such wisdom is more valuable than gold. Around him, the other members of the household engage in their own evening preparations, each person moving through the dimming light with the sure-footedness of those who know every beam and board of their dwelling as intimately as they know the lines of their own palms. The women of the house, their faces softened by the gentle glow of the dying fire, gather the wooden bowls and drinking horns from the evening meal, wiping them clean with practiced efficiency before storing them in their appointed places, for in the morning darkness that will come all too soon, everything must be exactly where searching hands expect to find it. Children, their energy finally beginning to flag after a day spent in the endless activities of youth, are guided toward the sleeping platforms that line the walls of the longhouse, their small bodies already beginning to yield to the ancient pull of sleep that has claimed young ones since the beginning of human memory. Their mothers wrap them in blankets of wool and coverlets of fur, creating small cocoons of warmth that will hold them safe through the long hours of darkness ahead, while softly humming melodies that are older than any written language, songs that speak directly to the part of the human soul that remembers what it was to sleep beneath stars uncounted and unnamed. The quality of light within the longhouse has now shifted to something almost magical, a combination of the deep orange glow from the banked fire and the last purple traces of twilight that filter through the smoke hole above, creating an atmosphere that seems to exist somewhere between the waking world and the realm of dreams. In this liminal space, voices naturally drop to whispers, movements become slower and more deliberate, and the very air itself seems to thicken with the approaching presence of sleep, that ancient visitor who comes each night to claim his due from mortal beings. Outside the thick walls of the longhouse, the natural world continues its own preparations for the night ahead, with birds settling into their roosts with final chirps and rustles, while the nocturnal creatures begin to stir in anticipation of their time of dominion. The wind, which during the day had been a boisterous companion full of energy and movement, now gentles itself to a mere whisper, barely strong enough to stir the smoke rising from the longhouse roof or to create the smallest of ripples on the mirror-smooth surface of the fjord below. As full darkness approaches with the inevitability of the tide, bringing with it a quality of blackness that the modern world has entirely forgotten, a darkness so complete and absolute that it seems almost to have physical weight and presence, the inhabitants of the longhouse complete their final preparations for sleep. Tools are set in their places, weapons hung upon their pegs, the door secured with its heavy wooden bar that will keep the household safe from whatever might walk abroad in the darkness, though in truth there is little to fear in these lands, save the occasional wolf or bear, creatures that have learned through long experience to give human dwellings a wide berth. The sleeping platforms, which during the day serve as benches for work and conversation, have been transformed with layers of straw and heather into surprisingly comfortable beds, topped with woolen blankets and the pelts of animals taken in the hunt, creating surfaces that are both soft and warm, perfectly suited to cradle bodies tired from honest labor. These communal sleeping spaces, where entire families rest together in the warmth of shared proximity, represent something profound about the Viking understanding of human nature, an acknowledgement that we are not meant to face the vulnerability of sleep alone, but rather in the company of those we trust and love. As the last member of the household settles into their appointed place, the longhouse falls into a silence that is not empty, but rather full of the small sounds that mark a dwelling at peace, the soft breathing of children already claimed by sleep, the occasional pop and hiss from the banked fire as it slowly consumes its fuel, the creak of timber adjusting to the cooling temperature of night, and underneath it all, like a bass note too low to properly hear, but felt in the very bones, the eternal rhythm of the sea against the shore, that most ancient of lullabies that has been singing the world to sleep since water first met land. In this moment, as darkness completes its dominion over the northern lands, and the stars emerge in their full glory to wheel through their eternal dance across the sky, the stage is set for something remarkable, something that the modern world, with all its artificial lights and electronic distractions, has largely forgotten. The experience of truly natural sleep, aligned with the rhythms of the earth and sky, unmarred by the thousand interruptions that plague contemporary rest. For the Vikings, masters of survival in one of the world's most challenging environments, had discovered through necessity what science would only confirm centuries later, that the human body and mind are designed for a pattern of sleep profoundly different from what most now experience. A pattern that provided not just rest, but deep restoration, not just unconsciousness, but a nightly journey into realms of healing and renewal. In the lands of the north, where the Vikings made their homes among the fjords and forests, the sun follows a path unlike anywhere else in the inhabited world, tracing an arc through the heavens that changes so dramatically with the turning of the seasons that it might as well be two different celestial bodies entirely, one for summer and one for winter, each bringing with it a completely different way of being in the world. To understand how the Viking people achieved what may have been the most restorative sleep in human history, one must first comprehend the extraordinary dance between light and darkness that played out above their heads, a cosmic performance that shaped not just their sleeping patterns, but the very rhythm of their existence. During the height of summer, when the earth tilts its northern face toward the sun, with an eagerness that speaks of ancient longing, the lands of Scandinavia experience something that those dwelling in more temperate regions can scarcely imagine, a phenomenon where the sun, that great golden wanderer of the sky, refuses to fully set, instead tracing a low circle around the horizon, like a faithful hound, unwilling to leave its master's side. In the most northern reaches of the Viking territories, the sun would remain visible for weeks on end, creating a world bathed in perpetual light that shifted in quality from the bright gold of midday to the deep amber of eternal sunset, but never quite surrendering to true darkness. This endless day of the northern summer created challenges for sleep that the Viking people met with remarkable ingenuity and adaptation, for the human body, despite its remarkable capacity for adjustment, still craves the darkness that signals the time for rest and restoration. The Vikings learned to create artificial night within their dwellings, using thick hangings of wool and leather to block out the persistent light that would otherwise stream through every crack and opening, transforming their longhouses into caves of manufactured darkness, where sleep could find purchase, even as the sun continued its relentless vigil outside. Yet even with these adaptations, summer sleep among the Vikings was a different creature entirely from its winter counterpart, shorter in duration and lighter in quality, as if the body itself understood that these precious months of warmth and growth were too valuable to spend in extended slumber. The people would often sleep in shorter segments during the white nights of summer, catching rest when they could, between the endless tasks of farming, fishing, and preparing for the long darkness that everyone knew was coming, always coming, as inevitable as the tide. As the wheel of the year turned and autumn began to paint the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, the sun would begin its gradual retreat, each day tracing a slightly lower arc across the sky, each sunset coming a few minutes earlier than the last, a barely perceptible change at first that would accelerate as the season progressed until the transformation became impossible to ignore. The Vikings, attuned to these subtle shifts in a way that modern people have largely lost, would begin their own preparations, not just the physical work of storing food and fuel, but the psychological adjustment necessary for the coming months of darkness. The autumn equinox marked a crucial turning point, that brief moment of balance when day and night stood as equals, like two warriors pausing before battle to size each other up, knowing that soon one must yield to the other. After this pivotal day, darkness would begin its inexorable advance, claiming more and more of each day until it achieved almost complete dominion over the northern lands, creating conditions for sleep that were as extreme in their way as the endless light of summer had been in its. Winter in Viking Scandinavia brought a quality of darkness that the modern world, with its electric lights and glowing screens, can barely comprehend. A darkness so complete and encompassing that it seemed to have texture and weight, pressing down upon the land like a thick blanket, woven from the very absence of light itself. During the deepest part of winter, in the weeks surrounding the solstice, the sun would barely peak above the horizon in the most northern settlements, providing perhaps 4 or 5 hours of weak, watery light that seemed more like an extended twilight than true day. This profound darkness created the perfect conditions for what the Vikings' bodies naturally craved: extended, deep, segmented sleep that followed patterns laid down in human physiology over countless millennia of evolution. As the sun disappeared for 18, 19, even 20 hours each day, the Viking people would settle into their winter rhythm of rest, a pattern so different from summer that it might have belonged to a different species entirely. The first sleep would begin shortly after the early darkness fell, perhaps only a few hours after the midday meal, as bodies responded to the absence of light with an overwhelming desire for rest. The longhouses during these winter months became chambers of hibernation, though not in the complete sense that a bear might experience, but rather a slowing down of all activity to match the reduced energy of the season. The central fire, kept burning continuously throughout the winter months, would provide the only light during the long hours of darkness, its flickering glow creating dancing shadows on the walls that seemed to move with a life of their own, while the smoke rose through the roof opening to disappear into the black vault of the sky above. During these extended nights, the Vikings would experience the full expression of segmented sleep, that ancient pattern where slumber came in two distinct phases, separated by a period of quiet wakefulness. The first sleep, beginning in what would be considered early evening by modern standards, would last for 3 to 4 hours, a deep and restorative rest that allowed the body to perform its most crucial repairs and maintenance. Then, as naturally as the tide ebbing from the shore, consciousness would return, not with the jarring suddenness of an alarm clock, but with a gentle surfacing, like rising slowly through dark water toward the air above. This period of nighttime wakefulness, lasting perhaps an hour or two, was not considered a problem to be solved or a disorder to be treated, but simply a natural part of the night's rhythm, as expected and accepted as the need for food or water. During these quiet hours, while others might still be deep in their first sleep, individuals would tend to simple tasks that required little light, banking the fire to ensure it would last until morning, checking on animals housed in the adjoining sections of the longhouse, or simply lying in contemplative silence, allowing thoughts to drift like smoke through the darkness. The second sleep would come as naturally as the first had departed, a gentle return to unconsciousness that would last until the first grey light of dawn began to seep through the smoke hole, signaling the start of another brief winter day. This pattern, repeated night after night throughout the long winter months, created a rhythm of rest that modern sleep researchers now understand to be deeply aligned with human biological needs, allowing for the full expression of all sleep stages and the complete restoration of both body and mind. The transition between the extreme seasons brought its own particular qualities of light and darkness, as spring and autumn provided brief periods of more balanced days that served as bridges between the extremes. During these transitional times, the Vikings would adjust their sleep patterns accordingly, demonstrating a flexibility and responsiveness to natural rhythms that speaks to their deep connection with the world around them. They understood, in a way that required no scientific explanation, that human beings are creatures of light and darkness, and that honoring both in their proper measure was essential for health and well-being. The sun's journey through the northern sky created more than just practical challenges for sleep. It shaped the very consciousness of the Viking people, creating a worldview that understood light and darkness not as opposites to be conquered or controlled, but as partners in an eternal dance that gave structure and meaning to existence. The long winter nights were not something to be endured but embraced, a time for rest and restoration that was as necessary as the frantic activity of the summer months. This acceptance of natural rhythms, this willingness to bend human activity to the dictates of the sun, rather than attempting to impose artificial schedules upon the world, may have been one of the keys to the remarkably restorative sleep that the Vikings enjoyed. As we contemplate this ancient relationship between the northern sun and Viking sleep, we begin to understand that what made their rest so profoundly effective was not any single factor, but rather a complete integration of life with the natural world, a synchronization of human needs with cosmic rhythms that created conditions for sleep that were, quite literally, as natural as the turning of the earth itself. In their acceptance of the sun's extreme journey through their sky, the Vikings found not limitation, but liberation, discovering in the heart of darkness the secret of perfect rest. In the time of the Vikings, when the sun finally surrendered its dominion to the night and slipped beneath the horizon like a weary traveler seeking rest, the darkness that followed was of a quality and character that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten. A darkness so complete and absolute that it possessed an almost physical presence, wrapping around the settlements and dwellings of the northern people, like a vast cloak woven from the very absence of light itself. This was not the half-darkness that passes for night in our contemporary world, where street lamps cast their orange glow against the sky and the blue flicker of screens seeps through every window, but rather a darkness so profound that a hand held before the face might as well not exist. A darkness that swallowed sight completely and forced the other senses to awaken and take precedence. To truly understand the nature of Viking sleep, one must first comprehend the extraordinary quality of the darkness in which it occurred. For this was darkness as the human body had evolved to experience it over countless millennia. Darkness that triggered ancient biological responses refined by millions of years of evolution. Darkness that spoke directly to the deepest and most primitive parts of the human brain, whispering in a language older than words that now was the time for rest and restoration. In our modern world, where artificial light has banished true darkness to only the most remote corners of the earth, we have lost touch with this fundamental human experience, and with it, perhaps, we have lost something essential about what it means to achieve truly restorative sleep. When darkness fell upon a Viking settlement, it fell completely and without compromise, transforming the familiar landscape of day into something altogether different, a world where the usual markers and boundaries dissolved into an undifferentiated blackness that could be both comforting and unsettling in equal measure. Inside the longhouses, the only light came from the central hearth, where the fire had been carefully banked to last through the night, its glowing embers providing just enough illumination to prevent complete blindness, but not enough to truly see by, creating a twilight world of shadows and suggestions where the imagination could run free. This firelight, dancing and flickering with a life of its own, cast moving shadows on the walls that seemed to breathe and shift with each subtle change in the flames, creating an atmosphere that was simultaneously protective and mysterious, safe and slightly otherworldly. The quality of this light was fundamentally different from the steady, harsh illumination of electric bulbs, for firelight contains within its spectrum a preponderance of red and orange wavelengths that the human eye perceives as warm and soothing, wavelengths that do not interfere with the body's production of melatonin in the way that the blue heavy light of modern sources does so dramatically. As the Vikings prepared for sleep in this gentle, flickering light, their bodies were already beginning the complex cascade of hormonal changes that ready the human system for rest, a process that began the moment the sun dipped below the horizon and the first shadows began to lengthen across the land. In the gathering darkness, the pineal gland, that tiny pine cone-shaped structure nestled deep within the brain, would begin its nightly work of converting serotonin into melatonin, that most crucial of sleep hormones that serves as the body's internal signal that the time for wakefulness has passed and the time for sleep has arrived. This process, which in the modern world is constantly disrupted and delayed by artificial light, proceeded in Viking times with a smoothness and reliability that we can barely imagine, for there was nothing to interfere with the ancient dialogue between darkness and the human body, nothing to confuse the biological rhythms that had been refined over countless generations of human existence. As the darkness deepened and the melatonin levels rose in their blood, the Vikings would feel the familiar heaviness in their limbs, the gentle fog that crept into their thoughts, the irresistible pull toward the sleeping platforms where furs and blankets awaited. The complete darkness of Viking nights served another crucial function in promoting deep and restorative sleep. For in the absence of visual stimulation, the brain could fully disengage from the vigilance required during daylight hours, allowing it to shift into the slower brainwave patterns associated with deep sleep. In our modern world, where even the darkness of our bedrooms is often penetrated by the glow of alarm clocks, the standby lights of electronic devices, and the ambient light pollution that seeps through even the heaviest curtains, our brains never fully receive the signal that it is safe to completely let go of consciousness, resulting in sleep that is lighter and less restorative than what our ancestors experienced. The Vikings, by contrast, slept in a darkness so complete that the brain could fully surrender its daytime vigilance, sinking into the deepest stages of sleep where the most crucial restoration occurs, where memories are consolidated and sorted, where the cellular damage of the day is repaired, where growth hormone is released to maintain and rebuild tissues throughout the body. This quality of sleep, which modern people often struggle to achieve even with the aid of medications and elaborate sleep hygiene routines, came naturally to the Vikings simply by virtue of the profound darkness in which they slept. Outside the longhouses, the darkness of the Scandinavian night was even more absolute, for there were no street lights to create pools of illumination, no neon signs to paint the sky with artificial color, no headlights to sweep across the landscape in bright arcs of disruption. The only lights in this primordial darkness were those provided by nature herself. The cold fire of the stars wheeling overhead in patterns that the Vikings knew as intimately as the faces of their children. The occasional ghostly dance of the aurora borealis painting the northern sky with sheets of green and gold, and during certain times of the month, the silver radiance of the moon casting everything in shades of grey and shadow. Even moonlight, that most natural of nighttime illuminations, was understood by the Vikings to have its own effects on sleep and dreams, with the full moon bringing a quality of rest that was lighter and more filled with visions, while the dark of the moon provided the deepest and most dreamless sleep. This understanding, dismissed by modern science for many years as mere superstition, has recently been validated by research showing that lunar cycles do indeed affect human sleep patterns, though the mechanism remains somewhat mysterious, perhaps a vestige of our long evolutionary history, when the moon's light could mean the difference between safety and danger during the night. The Vikings' relationship with darkness extended beyond mere acceptance to something approaching reverence, for they understood that the night and its profound darkness were not enemies to be conquered, but partners in the great cycle of existence, as necessary for human well-being as food or water or air. They did not fear the darkness as many modern people do, lying awake in anxiety when the power fails and plunges them into unaccustomed blackness, but rather welcomed it as an old friend whose arrival signaled the time for rest and restoration. In their oral traditions and mythologies, darkness was not portrayed as evil or threatening, but simply as the other half of existence, the necessary counterpart to light that gave meaning and structure to the world. The goddess Not, personification of night, was described as riding across the sky in a chariot pulled by a dark horse, bringing rest and dreams to mortals below, a benevolent figure who worked in harmony with her son Darga, the personification of day, to maintain the eternal rhythm of existence. This mythological understanding reflected a deep psychological truth about the human need for darkness, a need that modern life has taught us to deny or overcome, but which remains encoded in our very cells. The profound darkness of Viking nights also created conditions for a phenomenon that sleep researchers now recognize as crucial for psychological health: the proper cycling through all stages of sleep, including adequate time in rapid eye movement, REM sleep, where the most vivid dreams occur and where the brain processes emotional experiences and consolidates certain types of memory. The artificial extension of light into the evening hours that characterizes modern life has been shown to compress and distort these sleep stages, particularly reducing the amount of REM sleep in the early part of the night. But the Vikings, sleeping in their natural darkness, would have experienced the full expression of all sleep stages in their proper proportions. As we consider the quality of darkness that enveloped the Viking world each night, we begin to understand that what we have gained in safety and convenience through artificial illumination, we may have lost in the quality of our rest and restoration. The Vikings' profound sleep was not achieved through any special technique or practice, but simply through living in harmony with the natural cycle of light and darkness that had governed human existence since the beginning of our species. In their acceptance of true darkness, they found the key to true rest, a lesson that echoes across the centuries to our brightly lit but poorly rested modern world. As we cross the threshold of a Viking longhouse in the gathering dusk, moving from the cooling air of the Scandinavian evening into the warm, smoky interior that served as the center of family life, we enter a space that was designed not by architects with degrees and drafting tables, but by generations of practical wisdom, each element refined through centuries of trial and error, until what remained was a structure perfectly adapted to the harsh northern climate and the human need for rest and restoration. The longhouse, stretching perhaps 30 meters in length and 6 meters in width, rises before us like the overturned hull of a great ship, which is no accident, for the Vikings applied the same understanding of curves and tensions that kept their vessels afloat to the buildings that sheltered them through the long winters. The first sensation upon entering is the warmth that envelops us like a welcoming embrace, a warmth that radiates from the central hearth that runs along the middle of the structure, a long fire pit lined with stones that have been carefully selected for their ability to absorb and slowly release heat throughout the night. This hearth, the beating heart of the longhouse, serves multiple purposes beyond mere warmth, for its smoke rises through the interior space before escaping through openings in the roof, creating a layer of warm air near the ceiling that acts as insulation, while the smoke itself serves to preserve the wooden beams from rot and discourage insects from making their homes in the thatch above. The walls of the longhouse curve inward as they rise, creating a space that feels both expansive and intimate, with the curved shape serving to circulate the warm air from the fire throughout the structure, while also providing remarkable stability against the fierce winds that sweep across the northern landscape. These walls, constructed from massive timbers that were often taken from trees that had grown for centuries before being felled, are chinked with a mixture of mud, moss, and animal hair that seals out the cold while still allowing the structure to breathe, preventing the build-up of moisture that could lead to rot and decay. Along both sides of the longhouse, running the entire length of the building, are the raised platforms that serve as the primary living and sleeping spaces for the inhabitants, elevated approximately half a meter above the packed earth floor. These platforms, constructed from heavy planks laid across sturdy log supports, serve multiple functions that all contribute to better rest. They lift the sleepers above the cold that seeps through the earth floor. They provide storage space beneath for tools and supplies. And perhaps most importantly, they create a defined space for sleep that the mind recognizes and responds to, a psychological boundary that helps trigger the transition from wakefulness to rest. The sleeping platforms are divided into sections by wooden partitions that rise perhaps a meter high, creating semi-private spaces for different family groups while still allowing the warm air to circulate freely above. These partitions, often decorated with carved designs that tell stories of family history or invoke protective spirits, serve to create a sense of personal space within the communal environment, allowing each person to feel secure and protected while still benefiting from the shared warmth and companionship of the group. The Vikings understood intuitively what modern psychology has confirmed, that humans sleep better when they feel both connected to their community and possessed of their own defined territory. Above our heads, the roof structure reveals itself as a marvel of engineering without nails or metal fasteners, held together entirely by the careful fitting of wooden joints and the tension of the overall design. The roof beams, darkened by years of smoke from the hearth below, create a complex pattern of shadows in the firelight, a geometric dance that seems to shift and move as the flames flicker and dance. The thatch that covers the exterior, laid in overlapping layers like the feathers of a great bird, provides remarkable insulation, keeping the warmth in during winter and the heat out during the brief northern summer. The smoke holes that pierce the roof at regular intervals serve a crucial function in creating the ideal sleeping environment, for they allow not just smoke to escape, but also provide ventilation that prevents the air from becoming too stale while still maintaining the warmth that makes sleep comfortable. These openings can be partially covered with wooden shutters or leather flaps to regulate the airflow, allowing the inhabitants to fine-tune the interior atmosphere to match the conditions outside and the needs of the moment. On the coldest nights, the openings might be nearly closed, creating a warm, drowsy atmosphere that naturally encourages sleep, while on milder evenings they might be left more open to allow fresh air to circulate. The floor of the longhouse, made of packed earth that has been compressed by countless footsteps over many years, is covered in places with rushes or straw that can be changed periodically, creating a surface that is both practical and comfortable underfoot. This earthen floor serves an important function in regulating the interior temperature, absorbing excess heat during the day and releasing it slowly during the night, creating a natural thermal mass that helps maintain a steady temperature conducive to sleep. The slight slope of the floor toward the center ensures that any moisture runs toward the hearth where it can evaporate, preventing the damp conditions that could make sleep uncomfortable. At the far ends of the longhouse, smaller chambers are sometimes partitioned off for storage or for the heads of the household who might enjoy slightly more privacy, though even these spaces remain connected to the main hall, sharing in the warmth and the communal atmosphere that defines Viking domestic life. These end chambers, slightly removed from the constant activity of the central space, often serve as the preferred sleeping quarters for the elderly or infirm, who benefit from the quieter atmosphere while still remaining part of the household community. The furnishings of the longhouse are sparse by modern standards, but perfectly adapted to their purpose, with wooden chests serving double duty as storage and seating, and the sleeping platforms themselves requiring little more than layers of furs and textiles to transform them into comfortable beds. The Vikings understood that too many possessions could clutter not just the physical space, but also the mind, and their minimalist approach to furnishing created an environment that naturally promoted mental calm and relaxation as bedtime approached. As night deepens and the household prepares for sleep, the longhouse reveals its true genius as a machine for rest, every element working in harmony to create the ideal conditions for restorative slumber. The dying embers of the hearth provide just enough light to prevent complete darkness, while not enough to interfere with the production of sleep hormones. The curved walls deflect drafts while maintaining air circulation. The raised platforms provide comfort and security, and the communal yet divided space offers both companionship and privacy in perfect balance. The sounds within the longhouse as night falls create their own soporific symphony. The soft crackling of the fire as it settles into embers, the occasional creak of timber adjusting to temperature changes, the rustle of straw and fur as people settle into their sleeping positions, and underneath it all, the gentle rhythm of breathing as one by one the inhabitants surrender to sleep. These sounds, consistent and predictable, create a sonic environment that the brain recognizes as safe and familiar, allowing the vigilance of daytime to finally relax into the vulnerability of sleep. Even the smells of the longhouse contribute to its effectiveness as a sleeping chamber. for the human brain forms powerful associations between sense and states of consciousness. The mixture of wood smoke, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the lanolin scent of wool, and the earthier aromas of the packed floor create a complex olfactory signature that would have signaled to every Viking from childhood that this was a place of safety and rest, triggering physiological responses that prepared the body for sleep before the head even touched the pillow. As we complete our journey through the longhouse at bedtime, we begin to understand that this structure was not simply a shelter from the elements, but a carefully evolved environment for living and sleeping, every element refined through generations of use, until what remained was almost perfect in its simplicity and effectiveness. The Vikings did not need sleep specialists or elaborate bedtime routines, because their very dwellings were designed to naturally guide them into restorative rest, creating conditions that worked in harmony with human biology rather than against it. A lesson in architecture and living that resonates across the centuries to our modern struggles with sleep, in spaces that too often seem designed to prevent, rather than promote the rest we so desperately need. As the last traces of daylight fade from the smoke holes above, and the longhouse settles into the embrace of true darkness, we witness the beginning of an ancient choreography, a nightly ritual performed by countless generations of Viking families as they prepare for their first sleep of the evening. Each movement practiced and purposeful, refined through centuries of repetition into a kind of domestic poetry that speaks of humanity's eternal negotiation with the night. The family we observe this evening is neither wealthy nor poor by Viking standards, possessing enough to live comfortably through the harsh northern seasons, but not so much that their wealth sets them apart from their neighbors. For in this world of mutual dependence and shared struggle against the elements, extreme disparities of fortune are both rare and discouraged by the very nature of survival. The father of the household, a man of perhaps 35 winters, whose hands bear the calluses of both farming and seafaring, moves with deliberate slowness toward the central hearth, where the evening fire still burns with enough vigor to cast dancing shadows on the walls, but must now be carefully managed to last through the long hours ahead. He selects pieces of wood from the stack near the fire, with the discrimination of an artist choosing colors for a painting, knowing that different woods burn at different rates and produce different qualities of heat, and that the wrong choice now could mean a cold awakening in the depths of the night when rekindling the fire would disturb the entire household. With movements that seem almost ceremonial in their precision, he arranges the selected logs over the glowing embers, creating a structure that will burn slowly and steadily, producing more heat than light, more warmth than flame. For the time of bright fires and active work has passed, and now begins the time of gentle warmth and gradual descent into sleep. He adds a final layer of peat to the arrangement, those compressed blocks of ancient vegetation that will smolder through the night like the earth's own memory of sunlight, releasing their stored energy in a slow, steady stream that will keep the killing cold at bay until dawn brings the opportunity to build the fire anew. While the father tends to the fire, the mother of the household performs her own essential tasks, moving through the longhouse with the sure-footed grace of one who knows every board and beam as intimately as her own thoughts. She gathers the wooden bowls and drinking horns from the evening meal, wiping them clean with practiced efficiency and storing them in their appointed places. For in the morning darkness that will come all too soon, fumbling for misplaced items would disturb the peace of the household and delay the important work of the new day. Her movements are economical and quiet, creating barely a whisper of sound as she goes about these final tasks. For already some of the younger children have begun to yield to sleep's insistent pull. The children themselves, ranging in age from a babe in arms to a boy on the verge of manhood, prepare for sleep in their own ways, the younger ones already rubbing their eyes and yawning, while the older ones complete their own small responsibilities before they can claim their rest. The eldest son checks that the door is properly barred against the night, sliding the heavy wooden beam into place with a satisfying thud that speaks of security and protection, while his younger sister ensures that the water vessels are filled for the night, knowing that someone will surely wake with thirst during the long hours ahead, and that stumbling to the well in darkness is both dangerous and unnecessary. In the section of the longhouse where the animals are housed, separated from the human living space by a wooden partition, but still sharing the same roof and benefiting from the same warmth, the cattle and sheep have already settled for the night, their quiet breathing and occasional shifting adding to the symphony of sounds that mark a household preparing for rest. The presence of these animals, far from being a mere economic necessity, adds to the sense of warmth and security that pervades the longhouse, their body heat contributing to the overall temperature and their familiar sounds providing a comforting backdrop to sleep. As each family member completes their appointed tasks, they begin to gravitate toward the sleeping platforms, drawn by the promise of rest, like iron filings to a lodestone. The platforms have been prepared earlier in the day, with fresh straw laid over the permanent base of dried grasses and heather, creating a surface that is both supportive and yielding, conforming to the body's contours while providing enough structure to prevent the aches that come from sleeping on too soft a surface. Over this foundation, layers of woolen blankets and animal furs have been arranged, creating individual nests of warmth that await their occupants. The grandmother of the household, a woman whose years have granted her the privilege of retiring first, settles onto her section of the platform with a soft sigh of satisfaction, her old bones grateful for the horizontal position after a day of vertical labor. She wraps herself in a particularly fine bearskin that represents decades-old proof of her late husband's prowess as a hunter, the thick fur still maintaining its ability to trap warmth despite the passing of many winters. Her presence on the sleeping platform seems to serve as a signal to the younger children that the time for sleep has truly arrived, and they begin to cluster around her like chicks around a hen. The youngest children are helped onto the platform by their mother, who wraps each one carefully in their own coverings, tucking the edges under their small bodies to create cocoons of warmth that will hold them secure through the night. She murmurs soft words to each child, not quite songs and not quite stories, but something in between, a gentle flow of sound that seems designed more to soothe than to communicate, tapping into that primal connection between the maternal voice and the infant's descent into sleep that exists across all cultures and all times. As more family members take their places on the sleeping platforms, the social dynamics of the household become visible in the sleeping arrangements, with the parents occupying the central position where they can monitor both children and the entrants, the grandmother in her place of honor near the warmest part of the hearth, and the children arranged by age and temperament in a pattern that minimizes conflict and maximizes comfort. The eldest son, approaching the age when he might soon have his own household, occupies a position at the edge of the family group, symbolically poised between childhood and adulthood, belonging and independence. The process of settling for sleep is not hurried, but proceeds with a natural rhythm that allows each person to make their own transition from the activity of day to the passivity of night. Some family members remain sitting on the edge of the platform for a time, perhaps finishing a small task by the dying firelight, or simply gazing into the embers and allowing their thoughts to settle like sediment in still water. Others lie down immediately but remain wakeful, their eyes open in the darkness as they listen to the familiar sounds of the household settling around them. The father is among the last to take his place on the platform, making a final circuit of the longhouse to ensure that all is secure for the night, checking the fire one last time to satisfy himself that it will neither die completely nor flare up dangerously, and pausing at the door to listen for any sounds from outside that might signal danger or disturbance. Only when he is satisfied that his household is safe does he finally approach the sleeping platform, moving carefully to avoid disturbing those who have already found their way to sleep. As he settles onto the platform beside his wife, the longhouse reaches a moment of perfect equilibrium, with all its inhabitants in their appointed places, and the transition from day to night complete. The darkness is now total, save for the faint glow of the banked fire, creating a world bounded by the walls of the longhouse, a universe in miniature, where the only reality is warmth and safety, and the gradual descent into sleep. The sounds of the household have shifted from the active noises of evening tasks to the passive sounds of rest. Deep breathing, the occasional murmur of a dreaming child, the soft crackle of the fire, and the gentle groaning of timbers as they adjust to the cooling temperature. This is the moment when the first sleep truly begins, not as a sudden transition, but as a gradual yielding, like a boat slipping its mooring and drifting out onto a calm sea. One by one, consciousness releases its hold on the members of the household, starting with the youngest children and spreading like a benevolent contagion through the family group. The adults feel the familiar heaviness in their limbs, the blurring of thought that signals the approach of sleep, and rather than fighting it as modern people often do, they welcome it as a trusted friend, knowing that this first sleep will carry them through the early hours of the night until the natural wakening that divides their rest. The first sleep of the Vikings was different from modern sleep in its quality and depth, coming as it did at the natural conclusion of daylight, rather than at an arbitrary time determined by clocks and schedules. Their bodies, attuned to the rhythms of light and darkness, temperature and season, were ready for sleep in a way that required no forcing or coaxing. As the last member of the household surrenders to unconsciousness, the longhouse becomes a chamber of dreams, filled with sleeping souls who rest secure in the knowledge that they are following a pattern as old as humanity itself, a pattern that promises not just rest, but restoration, not just unconsciousness, but renewal. Beneath the sleeping forms of our Viking household lies a testament to human ingenuity in the pursuit of comfort, a carefully constructed landscape of natural materials that transforms hard wooden platforms into surfaces capable of cradling the human body through the long northern nights, each layer chosen not by accident, but through generations of accumulated wisdom about what promotes the deepest and most restorative sleep. The foundation of this nocturnal architecture begins with straw, that most humble of materials, yet one possessed of qualities that modern sleep science has only recently begun to appreciate. For straw, when properly prepared and arranged, creates a surface that is simultaneously supportive and yielding, firm enough to maintain proper spinal alignment, yet soft enough to cushion the body's pressure points. The straw used in Viking bedding was not simply thrown down in random handfuls, but carefully selected and prepared, with preference given to the hollow stems of rye or barley that had been thoroughly dried and freed from grain, creating millions of tiny air pockets that served as natural insulation, while also allowing moisture to evaporate rather than accumulating in the bedding. This straw would be laid in overlapping layers, with the stems aligned in the same direction to create a smooth surface that wouldn't shift or bunch during the night, a technique that required skill and patience, but resulted in a foundation that could last for weeks before needing to be refreshed. Above the straw, the Vikings would layer dried grasses and aromatic herbs, particularly those varieties that grew in the meadows surrounding their settlements and possessed properties beyond mere comfort. Meadowsweet, with its sweet vanilla scent and natural anti-inflammatory properties, was particularly prized, as was wild thyme, whose essential oils were believed to promote peaceful sleep and ward off nightmares. These herbs were not merely scattered, but woven into loose mats that could be laid over the straw, creating a middle layer that added both cushioning and therapeutic benefits to the sleeping surface. The inclusion of heather in the bedding deserves special mention, for this hardy plant that painted the northern landscapes purple in late summer possessed qualities that made it ideal for sleep. When dried and layered properly, heather creates a naturally springy surface that responds to the body's movements without losing its supportive qualities, while its subtle fragrance has been shown to have mild sedative effects. The Vikings would gather heather at specific times of the year when its properties were at their peak, drying it slowly in the rafters of their longhouses, where the smoke from the hearth would help preserve it while adding its own protective qualities against insects and decay. Over these plant-based layers came the woolen blankets that formed the next stratum of Viking bedding, and here we encounter a material whose properties for sleep comfort have never been equaled by synthetic alternatives. The wool used in Viking bedding came primarily from their hardy northern sheep, whose fleece had evolved to protect them from the harsh Scandinavian climate and possessed remarkable qualities of insulation and moisture management. Unlike modern synthetic materials that trap moisture against the skin, wool can absorb up to 30% of its weight in moisture while still feeling dry to the touch, wicking perspiration away from the sleeping body and releasing it slowly into the air. The processing of this wool into bedding was an art form in itself, with the fleece being cleaned, carded, and either woven into blankets or left in its more natural state as fleece layers. The lanolin naturally present in the wool provided water resistance and antimicrobial properties, helping to keep the bedding fresh and healthy, even with the limited washing facilities available in Viking times. Different weights of wool were used for different seasons, with lighter blankets for the brief summer months and thick, densely woven covers for the depths of winter, each carefully crafted to provide exactly the right amount of insulation for the conditions. But perhaps the most luxurious and effective layer of Viking bedding consisted of the animal pelts that crowned the sleeping arrangements, transforming utilitarian sleeping platforms into nests of primitive comfort that rivaled anything the modern world has produced. These furs came from a variety of sources, each with its own particular qualities and uses. Bear pelts, thick and heavy, provided unparalleled warmth and were often reserved for the coldest nights or for elderly family members whose circulation no longer kept them warm. Wolf pelts, with their dense undercoat and water-resistant guard hairs, offered protection from moisture while maintaining breathability. Fox furs, softer and lighter, were perfect for children or for layering, and seal skins, naturally waterproof, served as barriers against any moisture that might seep up from below. The arrangement of these furs was not random, but followed patterns developed over centuries of experience, with the pelts positioned to take advantage of the natural direction of the fur, creating channels that would trap warm air while allowing excess heat to escape. The Vikings understood intuitively what modern studies have confirmed, that the ideal sleeping temperature is slightly cool, with the body warm but the breathing air fresh, and their layering of furs achieved this balance perfectly. The pelts would be arranged so that the sleeper could adjust their coverage during the night, pulling more furs over themselves if cold or pushing them aside if too warm, without having to fully wake or disturb their sleeping partners. The care and maintenance of these bedding materials was an ongoing process that formed part of the daily and seasonal rhythms of Viking life. On sunny days, the furs and blankets would be taken outside and hung on wooden frames, where the combination of sunlight and wind would refresh them and eliminate any moisture or odors that had accumulated. The straw and plant materials would be regularly turned and eventually replaced, with the old bedding often being burned in the hearth, its smoke adding to the complex aromatic environment of the longhouse, while also serving practical purposes in pest control. The Vikings also employed various treatments to enhance the properties of their bedding materials and protect them from the inevitable wear and tear of nightly use. Furs might be rubbed with mixtures of fat and herbs that would keep them supple while adding pleasant scents and protective qualities. Woolen blankets would be periodically treated with urine, which, despite modern sensibilities, served as an excellent cleaning agent due to its ammonia content, leaving the wool cleaner, softer, and more water-resistant after proper rinsing and drying. The psychological effects of sleeping in such natural materials cannot be overlooked, for there is something profoundly comforting about being surrounded by textures and scents that connect us to the natural world. The Vikings, sleeping in their cocoons of plant and animal materials, maintained a connection to the environment that modern synthetic bedding entirely lacks. The subtle sounds of straw compressing beneath their weight, the soft rustle of fur against fur, the gentle release of herbal fragrances as body heat warmed the dried plants. All of these created a multisensory experience that signaled to every part of the nervous system that this was a safe place to surrender to sleep. The temperature regulation provided by these natural materials was perhaps their most remarkable quality, for unlike modern bedding that often leaves sleepers alternating between too hot and too cold throughout the night, the Viking sleeping arrangement created a microclimate that remained remarkably stable. The straw and plant layers provided insulation from below while allowing air circulation. The wool absorbed and released moisture to prevent clamminess, and the furs trapped warm air while their natural properties prevented overheating. This stability of temperature is now recognized as one of the most important factors in achieving deep, uninterrupted sleep, yet the Vikings achieved it without thermostats or climate control, using only their understanding of natural materials. As we contemplate these beds of straw and dreams of fur, we begin to understand that Viking sleep was not simply a matter of lying down when tired, but was supported by a sophisticated understanding of how natural materials could be combined to create optimal sleeping conditions. Each element of their bedding served multiple purposes: comfort, insulation, moisture management, pest control, and even aromatherapy, in a holistic approach to sleep that modern technology, for all its advances, has yet to fully replicate. In their humble beds of straw and fur, the Vikings found a quality of rest that eludes many in our age of memory foam and climate control, a reminder that sometimes the old ways, refined by centuries of experience, possess a wisdom that progress cannot improve upon. In the gentle darkness of the Viking longhouse, as the family settles into their first sleep of the night, we witness a scene that would seem foreign to modern sensibilities, yet represents the way humans have slept for the vast majority of our species' existence. The intimate sharing of sleeping space that transforms individual vulnerability into collective security, creating conditions for rest that tap into the deepest wells of human psychology and physiology. The sleeping platforms that line the walls of the longhouse are not divided into individual bedrooms or even separate beds as we might expect, but rather form continuous surfaces where entire families sleep side by side, their bodies creating a landscape of shared warmth beneath the furs and blankets that cover them all. This communal sleeping arrangement, far from being a mere necessity driven by limited space or resources, represents a sophisticated understanding of human needs that modern sleep science is only beginning to rediscover. For we are not solitary creatures by nature, but social beings whose nervous systems are calibrated for connection, whose hearts literally synchronize their rhythms when we sleep near those we trust, whose breathing naturally falls into harmony with those around us in a dance of mutual regulation that promotes deeper and more restorative rest. The Vikings, unburdened by modern notions of privacy and personal space, understood intuitively what research now confirms: that humans sleep better when they feel the presence of their tribe around them. As we observe the family in their shared repose, we see how bodies naturally arrange themselves in patterns that maximize both comfort and connection, with children nestled against parents, elderly grandparents flanked by the younger generations who help maintain their warmth, and even the family's guests or extended relations finding their place in this nocturnal constellation of humanity. The positioning is neither random nor rigid, but flows from an organic understanding of each person's needs. The infant sleeps against the mother's breast, where the sound of her heartbeat provides the ultimate lullaby. The young children cluster together like puppies in a pile, generating and sharing heat with the efficiency of their high metabolisms, while the adults position themselves as guardians at the edges, their bodies forming a protective barrier between their young and the outside world. The physical warmth generated by this clustering of bodies cannot be underestimated in its importance for Viking sleep. For in the long northern winters, when temperatures could plummet to deadly levels, the difference between sleeping alone and sleeping in a group could literally be the difference between life and death. Each human body, maintaining its core temperature of nearly 37 degrees Celsius, functions as a biological furnace, radiating heat that is captured and held by the furs and blankets that cover the group, creating a microclimate of warmth that no amount of fire tending could equal. This shared warmth operates on principles of efficiency that modern heating systems struggle to match, for the heat is generated exactly where it is needed at the level of the sleeping bodies, rather than being dispersed throughout the entire space of the longhouse. But the benefits of communal sleeping extend far beyond mere temperature regulation into the realm of psychological comfort and neurological regulation that forms the foundation of truly restorative sleep. When humans sleep in close proximity to trusted others, our nervous systems shift from a state of vigilance to one of profound relaxation. For the primitive parts of our brains that scan constantly for danger can finally stand down, knowing that others share the watch, that any threat would have to overcome the group rather than a solitary individual. This shift from sympathetic nervous system arousal to parasympathetic dominance is not merely psychological, but profoundly physiological, affecting everything from heart rate to hormone production to the depth and quality of sleep stages. The Vikings understood, without the benefit of modern neuroscience, that sleeping alone was unnatural and potentially harmful, particularly for children whose developing nervous systems require the co-regulation provided by adult presence to properly mature. In their communal sleeping arrangements, Viking children never experienced the terror of waking alone in the dark that plagues so many modern children, banished to solitary bedrooms in the name of independence. Instead, they woke to the comforting sounds of family breathing, the warmth of familiar bodies nearby, the absolute certainty that they were not alone in facing whatever the night might bring. The acoustic environment created by communal sleeping also played a crucial role in promoting deep rest for the sounds of other humans sleeping, the rhythmic breathing, the occasional soft snore, the subtle movements as people shifted position, create what researchers now recognize as a form of biological white noise that masks more disturbing sounds while providing constant reassurance of companionship. These human sounds, unlike the mechanical white noise machines that many modern people use to aid sleep, contain subtle variations and rhythms that the brain recognizes as signs of safety, allowing for deeper relaxation than any artificial sound could provide. Within the communal sleeping space, a complex social dynamic played out that reinforced family bonds and social cohesion in ways that extended far beyond the nighttime hours. The intimacy of shared sleep created opportunities for quiet conversations in the darkness, for the passing of family wisdom from one generation to the next, for the comfort of touch when words were insufficient. Children learned by proximity the rhythms of adult life, absorbing through observation and osmosis the patterns of work and rest that would guide their own futures. The elderly, rather than being isolated in their infirmity, remained integrated into the heart of family life, their presence a reminder of continuity and tradition. The practice of hospitality, so central to Viking culture, extended naturally into the sleeping arrangements, with guests being incorporated into the family sleeping space rather than segregated into separate quarters. This inclusion served multiple purposes. It provided the guest with the same warmth and security enjoyed by the family. It allowed the hosts to ensure their guests' comfort and safety. And it created bonds of intimacy that transformed strangers into friends, business associates into extended family. The vulnerability of shared sleep created trust in ways that no amount of daytime interaction could match. Even the dogs of the household often found their place in the communal sleeping arrangement, curling up at the feet of their masters or nestled against the children they protected, adding their own warmth to the group while serving as an early warning system for any disturbance. This inclusion of animals in the sleeping space, far from being unhygienic as modern sensibilities might suggest, actually contributed to the health and well-being of the household, for the dog's superior hearing and sense of smell provided security that allowed the human sleepers to relax more completely, while their presence added to the sense of the household as a complete unit facing the night together. The seasonal variations in sleeping arrangements reflected the practical wisdom of the Vikings, with sleeping positions shifting subtly with the weather, spreading out slightly during the brief warm nights of summer to avoid overheating, then clustering more tightly as winter approached and every degree of shared warmth became precious. This flexibility in arrangement, this organic response to changing conditions, demonstrates a level of communal coordination and mutual consideration that speaks to the deep social bonds within Viking households. As the night progresses and the family sinks deeper into their first sleep, we can observe how their bodies unconsciously coordinate, with breathing rhythms gradually synchronizing, heart rates settling into similar patterns, and even their sleep stages beginning to align. This biological synchrony, impossible to achieve in isolation, creates conditions for extraordinarily restorative sleep. For when nervous systems regulate together, they achieve states of rest that solitary sleepers can rarely match. The Vikings, through their communal sleeping practices, tapped into this ancient mammalian wisdom of group rest, creating conditions that promoted not just individual health, but the cohesion of the family unit as a whole. The warmth of togetherness that characterized Viking sleep was thus both literal and metaphorical, physical and psychological, individual and communal. In their shared sleeping spaces, they found not just protection from the cold and danger of the northern nights, but a nightly renewal of the bonds that held their society together, a regular return to the primal comfort of the tribe that restored not just their bodies, but their souls. As modern life increasingly isolates us in our separate bedrooms, our single beds, our solitary struggles with insomnia, we might wonder what we have lost in our pursuit of privacy, what ancient wisdom we have forgotten in our rush toward independence, what warmth we have sacrificed in our flight from togetherness. In the depths of the northern night, perhaps 3 or 4 hours after the household first surrendered to sleep, a subtle shift begins to ripple through the longhouse like a gentle wave moving through still water, as one by one the sleepers begin their natural ascent from the depths of their first sleep toward a state of quiet wakefulness that their descendants would mistakenly label as insomnia, but which they understood to be as natural and necessary as the sleep that preceded and would follow it. This awakening comes not with the jarring suddenness of an alarm or disturbance, but with the organic gentleness of a flower opening to the moon, consciousness returning slowly like mist rising from a lake, bringing with it a particular quality of awareness that exists nowhere else in the cycle of day and night. The first to stir is often the master of the household, his internal clock calibrated by years of responsibility to sense when the fire needs tending. And he rises from the sleeping platform with movements so practiced and quiet that they barely disturb the furs that cover his family. In the profound darkness of the longhouse, lit only by the faint glow of embers in the hearth, he moves with the certainty of one who could navigate this space with his eyes closed, his bare feet finding the smooth, worn paths between sleeping platform and fire pit without conscious thought. The cold of the earthen floor against his soles serves to gently complete his awakening, grounding him in the physical world, while his mind retains some of the dreamlike quality of recent sleep. At the hearth, he carefully selects a piece of wood from the stack nearby, choosing by touch and weight rather than sight, knowing from experience which pieces will burn slowly and steadily through the remaining hours of darkness. As he places the wood on the embers, a small constellation of sparks rises toward the smoke hole above, carrying with them the prayers and thoughts that naturally arise in this liminal time between sleeps. The fresh wood catches slowly, sending new shadows dancing across the walls and bringing a subtle increase in warmth that will be appreciated by the sleepers, even if they never fully wake to acknowledge it. This tending of the fire is both practical necessity and spiritual practice, for the Vikings understood that the hearth fire was more than mere source of warmth and light, but the living heart of the household, requiring care and attention like any living thing. The quiet moments spent feeding the fire in the depths of night created a connection between the tender and the tended, a meditation without name or doctrine that nevertheless provided profound spiritual sustenance. In these moments, watching the flames slowly consume the offering of wood, the mind naturally turns to contemplation of the larger cycles of consumption and renewal that govern all existence. As the father completes his task at the hearth, other members of the household begin their own gentle emergence from first sleep, each awakening according to their own internal rhythms and needs. The mother, attuned to the subtle sounds of her infant, rises to nurse the child before hunger can escalate to crying that would disturb the entire household. In the darkness, guided more by instinct than sight, she brings the baby to her breast, and in the quiet of the night, the ancient ritual of nourishment unfolds with a peacefulness impossible to achieve during the busy daylight hours. The soft sounds of the nursing child create their own lullaby, a rhythm of satisfaction that speaks to the deepest parts of human nature. The grandmother, whose aging bladder no longer permits her to sleep through the entire night without relief, makes her careful way to the designated area for such needs, her movements slow but sure, her hand trailing along the familiar walls for guidance and support. Her journey through the darkness is unhurried, for she knows that this wakeful time is not something to be endured, but embraced, a gift of quiet hours when the demands of daily life recede and the mind can wander freely through memories and dreams. Upon her return, she does not immediately return to sleep, but sits on the edge of the sleeping platform, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her thoughts traveling paths known only to her. Among the children, one or two might wake partially, surfacing just enough from sleep to register the comforting presence of their parents, the warmth of their siblings, the familiar sounds and smells of home, before sinking back into dreams without ever fully crossing the threshold into wakefulness. But occasionally an older child might wake more completely, drawn perhaps by curiosity about these mysterious middle hours of the night when different rules seem to apply. Such a child might be beckoned quietly to join a parent by the fire, where whispered conversations unfold that would never occur in the full light of day. These nighttime conversations between parent and child hold a special place in the transmission of Viking culture, for in the quiet darkness, with the rest of the household sleeping around them, stories could be shared that went beyond the mere recitation of facts into the realm of deep wisdom. Family histories, ancient myths, practical knowledge and spiritual insights flowed from one generation to the next in these intimate moments, the darkness providing a cloak of privacy that encouraged the sharing of truths too delicate or profound for daylight discourse. The child, still soft with sleep and open in ways that daytime defenses would not allow, receives these gifts of knowledge like seeds planted in fertile soil. Sometimes the wakeful period might find husband and wife both conscious, lying side by side in the darkness, and in these moments a different kind of intimacy unfolds. Conversations in whispers so soft they barely disturb the air, touches that speak volumes without words, a renewal of the bonds that daily life with its endless demands can sometimes obscure. The Vikings understood that marriage was not just a daytime arrangement, but a partnership that extended through all hours, and these quiet moments in the night provided opportunities for connection that the busy daylight hours often precluded. For those who wake alone in their section of the sleeping platform, the time between sleeps offers opportunities for solitary contemplation, rare in the communal life of the longhouse. In the darkness, with only the faint glow of the fire and perhaps a shaft of moonlight through the smoke hole to break the black, the mind turns naturally inward, examining the events of the day past and the possibilities of the day to come. This is not the anxious rumination that plagues modern insomniacs, but a gentle review, like sorting through treasures by touch, keeping what serves and releasing what does not. The wakeful period also serves practical purposes beyond the tending of fires and bodies, for this is often when the subtle sounds of the night might alert the household to matters requiring attention. The restlessness of animals in their section of the longhouse might indicate the presence of a predator outside, requiring someone to check the security of the doors and perhaps add their human presence to discourage any wild visitors. The sound of wind picking up might prompt someone to check that shutters are secure and that nothing has been left outside that could be damaged by weather. These quiet investigations, carried out with minimal disturbance to the sleeping household, represent the constant vigilance required for survival in the harsh northern environment. As the wakeful period progresses, lasting perhaps an hour or two, though time moves differently in the darkness, an exact duration matters little. Those who have risen begin to feel the gentle pull of second sleep approaching. This return to slumber comes as naturally as the awakening did, without forcing or anxiety, simply a recognition that the body has completed whatever mysterious processes required this interlude of consciousness and is ready to return to the realm of dreams. One by one, family members return to their places on the sleeping platform, settling back into the warmth they temporarily abandoned, their bodies finding the familiar hollows in the straw and furs. The transition back to sleep is eased by the very activities of the wakeful period, for the tending of necessary tasks has quieted any anxieties. The gentle movements have released any physical tensions, and the quiet contemplation has allowed the mind to process and release the residue of daily experience. Unlike modern people who often fight wakefulness in the night, viewing it as a problem to be solved, the Vikings accepted this pattern as natural as breathing, neither fighting the awakening nor forcing the return to sleep, but simply flowing with the rhythm their bodies dictated. As the last wakeful member of the household settles back into their sleeping place, the longhouse returns to its state of communal slumber. But something has shifted in the quality of the darkness. Some subtle processing has occurred that makes the second sleep different from the first, often deeper and more filled with dreams, as if the wakeful interlude has cleared the path for consciousness to travel to even more profound depths. The sacred hour of waking has served its purpose, maintaining the fires, both literal and metaphorical, that sustain life through the long northern night. And now the household can surrender once more to sleep, secure in the knowledge that all is well, all is tended, all is as it should be in the great rhythm of night and day, sleep and waking that governs human existence. In the velvet darkness of the wakeful hour, when the longhouse rests in that peculiar state of quietude that exists only in the middle of the night, the ancient art of storytelling emerges from the shadows like a living thing, transforming the space between first and second sleep into a sacred theatre where words become worlds and memories transmute into myth. The grandfather, having woken naturally from his first sleep, as he has done for more years than he cares to count, finds himself sitting by the dying embers of the hearth with his grandson, a boy of perhaps 10 winters, who has inherited his elder's tendency toward wakefulness in these mysterious hours, and in the gentle glow that barely illuminates their faces, a ritual as old as language itself begins to unfold. The stories that emerge in these nighttime tellings are of a different quality than those shared during the bustling daylight hours, for the darkness strips away the distractions of the visible world and leaves only voice and imagination, creating a space where the boundaries between past and present, between the world of men and the world of gods, become permeable in ways that rational daylight does not permit. The grandfather's voice, roughened by years of wind and weather, takes on a hypnotic quality in the darkness, rising and falling like the waves against the fjord's shore, carrying his young listener on journeys that span both the geography of the known world and the vast territories of the spirit. He begins, as storytellers have always begun, with the words that signal the transition from ordinary speech to sacred narrative. Phrases worn smooth by countless repetitions, yet still possessing the power to transform the very air through which they travel. In the days when the gods still walked among men, he might say, or before the great tree Yggdrasil had grown its third root, or simply, listen, and I will tell you a true thing. And with these incantations, the membrane between the mundane and the mythical grows thin, allowing ancient wisdom to flow through the gap like water through a break in a dam. The stories themselves are never mere entertainment, though they certainly captivate and delight, but rather serve as vessels for carrying the accumulated wisdom of the culture from one generation to the next, encoding in narrative form everything from practical knowledge about navigation and weather to profound spiritual truths about the nature of existence and humanity's place within it. In the darkness, without visual aids or written texts, the human memory reveals its extraordinary capacity, with the grandfather reciting epic tales that might take hours to tell in their entirety, never missing a crucial detail or fumbling an important genealogy. For these stories live in his memory not as mere words but as lived experience. The boy listens with an intensity impossible to achieve during daylight hours, his mind freed from visual distractions and opened by the liminal state between sleeps to receive the stories not just as information, but as initiation, each tale adding another layer to his understanding of what it means to be Viking, to be human, to be part of the great web of existence that connects all things. In the darkness, his imagination paints pictures more vivid than any illuminated manuscript could provide, seeing Thor's hammer crashing down upon the giants, feeling the spray of the sea as Njord commands the waves, experiencing the terrible beauty of Ragnarok as if he stood witness to the end of worlds. Sometimes the stories told in these dark hours are not the great myths known to all, but the more intimate tales of family history, equally sacred in their way, that trace the lineage of the household back through generations of ancestors whose names must not be forgotten. The grandfather speaks of his own grandfather, who sailed with the great raiders to distant lands and returned with treasures both material and spiritual, of the grandmother who could read the runes and see the threads of fate, of the uncle who wrestled with a bear and lived to tell the tale, though he bore the scars for the rest of his days. These family stories, woven together with the greater mythology, create a tapestry of identity that places each member of the household within a context vast in both time and significance. The art of storytelling in the Viking world was not a passive experience for the listener, but a participatory act that required engagement of memory, imagination, and spirit. The boy is expected not just to listen, but to remember, to internalize the stories so completely that he will one day be able to pass them on with the same fidelity with which they were given to him. This is not rote memorization, but something deeper, an absorption of narrative into the very fiber of being, so that the stories become part of the listener's own experience, indistinguishable from personal memory. In the darkness, the grandfather's voice takes on different characters as the story requires, becoming the thunderous boom of Thor, the silky persuasion of Loki, the wise pronouncements of Odin, the keening grief of Frigg mourning her son. These vocal transformations, subtle in the darkness where facial expressions cannot be seen, demonstrate the sophisticated performance art that Viking storytelling represented, requiring not just memory, but dramatic skill, not just recitation, but embodiment. The boy learns through listening not just the stories themselves, but the art of telling them, absorbing the rhythms and cadences, the pauses and emphases that transform mere words into living narrative. The stories told in the wakeful hours often take on a more esoteric quality than those shared in daylight, delving into the mysteries that daylight reason might reject, but which the night-awakened mind can accept as truth. Tales of shape-shifting and spirit journeys, of communication with the dead and glimpses of the future, of the hidden connections between all things and the secret names of power. These are the stories that emerge when the rational mind sleeps and the deeper knowing awakens. The grandfather shares not just stories but initiations into ways of seeing and understanding that cannot be taught through direct instruction, but must be absorbed through the medium of narrative. As the telling continues, other members of the household might wake partially, drawn from sleep by the familiar cadence of storytelling, and lie in the darkness, listening without revealing their wakefulness, each taking from the story what they need in that moment. The mother might hear in a tale of Frigg's wisdom a solution to a problem that has been troubling her. The father might find in a story of Tyre's sacrifice the courage needed for a difficult decision. The grandmother might smile in the darkness at stories she has heard countless times, yet which never lose their power to move and instruct. The physical setting of these nighttime story sessions contributes to their power, for in the darkness, surrounded by sleeping kin, warmed by the dying fire and the proximity of loved ones, the listeners exist in a state of perfect receptivity. The stories enter not just through the ears, but through the entire being, settling into the bones and blood, becoming part of the listener's essential nature. This is education in its deepest sense, not the mere transfer of information, but the transmission of culture, wisdom, and identity through the medium of narrative art. As the story reaches its conclusion, always at just the right moment when the second sleep begins to call, the grandfather's voice gradually softens, allowing the tale to fade back into the darkness from which it emerged, rather than ending with jarring abruptness. The boy, filled now with images and wisdom that will process through his dreams, makes his way back to his sleeping place, carrying within him new treasures that no thief can steal and no time can tarnish. The grandfather, too, returns to his rest, satisfied in having fulfilled one of the most sacred duties of the elder, the passing on of stories that connect the present to the past and ensure the continuation of culture into the future. These stories told in darkness, preserved through countless generations without the aid of writing, represent one of humanity's greatest achievements, the creation of a technology of memory and meaning that required nothing but human voice and human consciousness to maintain. In the Viking longhouse, in the sacred hour between sleeps, this ancient technology revealed its full power, creating bonds between generations, transmitting essential knowledge, and maintaining the spiritual and cultural coherence of a people who understood that stories were not mere entertainment, but the very substance from which identity and meaning were woven. As the stories fade into silence and the wakeful hour draws to its natural close, a subtle transformation begins to move through the longhouse like a tide returning to shore. As one by one the members of the household feel the approach of their second sleep, that deeper and often more dream-filled slumber that will carry them through until dawn's first light touches the smoke holes above. This return to sleep comes not as a struggle against wakefulness, but as a gentle surrender to a biological imperative as old as humanity itself, a yielding that feels as natural and inevitable as the turning of the seasons or the phases of the moon that wheels through the darkness above the thatched roof. The grandfather, having discharged his storytelling duties to his young grandson, settles back onto the sleeping platform with the satisfied weariness of one who has completed important work, his old bones finding their familiar hollows in the straw and fur, as naturally as water finds its level. His consciousness does not fight to remain in the waking world, but begins its gentle descent almost immediately, aided by the profound sense of rightness that comes from having honored the ancient patterns of sleep and waking that his own grandfather followed, and his grandfather before him, back through chains of ancestry too long to count. Throughout the longhouse, the quality of darkness has shifted during the wakeful period, becoming somehow denser and more welcoming, as if the very air has thickened with the approach of second sleep. The fire in the hearth, recently tended, now burns with the steady, hypnotic rhythm that will maintain warmth without the dancing flames that might disturb rest, its red glow painting the smoke-darkened beams above with colors that exist at the very edge of perception. The temperature within the longhouse has reached that perfect balance where bodies are warm beneath their coverings, but the air remains cool enough for comfortable breathing, creating ideal conditions for the deep sleep that approaches. The mother, having nursed her infant during the wakeful time, now cradles the satisfied child against her body as both settle into their second sleep, their breathing naturally synchronizing in that ancient dance of mutual regulation that ensures both will rest deeply. The hormonal cascade triggered by nursing, the release of prolactin and oxytocin, creates in her body a state of profound relaxation that makes the return to sleep almost effortless, while the infant, belly full and nestled against the familiar warmth and scent of mother, sinks into the deep, restorative sleep that will fuel the rapid growth and development of early life. For the adults of the household, this second sleep carries a quality distinctly different from the first, as their bodies, having completed the initial phases of physical restoration during the earlier sleep period, now turn to different forms of renewal and repair. The growth hormone, released in pulses during the deepest stages of sleep, now works to repair the microscopic damage accumulated during the day's labors, while the brain, freed from the need to maintain even the minimal vigilance of first sleep, can engage in the complex processes of memory consolidation and emotional processing that occur primarily during the rapid eye movement stages that dominate later sleep. The Vikings, though they lacked the scientific vocabulary to describe these processes, understood through generations of lived experience that the second sleep brought gifts different from the first: more vivid dreams, deeper rest, and a particular quality of restoration that left them feeling not just rested, but renewed upon waking. They recognized in their cultural wisdom what modern sleep science has only recently confirmed, that the biphasic sleep pattern, with its natural division into two distinct periods, allows for the full expression of all sleep stages in their optimal proportions. As each family member finds their return to sleep, the longhouse fills with the subtle sounds of a household at perfect rest. The deep, regular breathing that speaks of profound relaxation. The occasional soft murmur of dream speech. The gentle rustling of furs as bodies shift into positions of greater comfort. These sounds, far from being disturbances, create a sonic environment that actually promotes deeper sleep, for the human brain, evolved in the context of communal sleeping, finds reassurance in the evidence of others resting nearby, allowing it to release the last vestiges of vigilance and sink into truly restorative slumber. The children, whose sleep patterns are naturally more fluid than those of adults, may not have fully awakened during the household's wakeful period, experiencing instead a lightening of sleep that allowed them to absorb the comforting sounds of their parents' movements and conversations without fully surfacing to consciousness. Now, as the adults settle back into sleep, the children too sink deeper, their developing nervous systems using these precious hours to build the neural connections that will serve them throughout their lives, their bodies producing the hormones necessary for growth and maturation in quantities possible only during deep sleep. The second sleep brings with it a parade of dreams more vivid and memorable than those of first sleep, for as the night progresses, the proportion of rapid eye movement sleep increases, and with it the strange and wonderful theatre of the dreaming mind. In their dreams, the Vikings journey to the 9 worlds of their cosmology, converse with ancestors and gods, receive warnings and wisdom, and process the experiences of waking life through the symbolic language that only the sleeping mind can fully speak. These dreams are not dismissed as mere phantasms, but honored as legitimate experiences, another form of reality that complements and completes the waking world. The grandmother, whose aged body requires less sleep than in her youth, may find her second sleep lighter than that of the younger household members, drifting in and out of consciousness like a boat bobbing gently on calm water. Yet even this lighter sleep serves its purpose, allowing her body to rest, while her mind remains partially alert, ready to respond to any need that might arise among her family. This is the gift and burden of the elder, to serve as guardian even in sleep, to maintain the watch while others can fully surrender to unconsciousness. Outside the longhouse, the natural world continues its own nocturnal rhythms, and occasionally these external sounds penetrate the awareness of the sleepers without fully waking them. The distant howl of a wolf, the bark of a fox, the wind singing through the trees, or the great silence of snowfall. These sounds become incorporated into dreams, woven into the narrative fabric of sleep, in ways that connect the dreamers to the wild world beyond their walls, maintaining even in unconsciousness the deep relationship between the Viking people and the land they inhabit. The hormonal symphony that orchestrates second sleep reaches its crescendo in the hours before dawn, with cortisol levels beginning their gradual rise in preparation for waking, while melatonin continues to maintain sleep until the appropriate moment. This delicate balance, regulated by the absence of artificial light and the maintenance of natural darkness, ensures that the sleepers will wake naturally and refreshed when the time comes, without the jarring shock of premature awakening that so often characterizes modern mornings. As the second sleep deepens and the hours pass unmarked in the darkness, the household exists in a state of perfect synchrony, their individual biorhythms harmonized through proximity and shared environment into a collective pattern of rest. This is sleep as it was meant to be, undisturbed by artificial schedules, unbroken by electronic intrusions, unhurried by the demands of clocks and calendars. It is sleep that honors the full complexity of human biology, allowing each stage its proper time and expression, creating conditions for restoration that go beyond mere rest to approach something like renewal. In this second embrace of sleep, the Vikings found not just the completion of their nightly rest, but a daily return to the source of their vitality and resilience. The biphasic pattern, with its natural break and resumption, allowed them to experience sleep not as a single monolithic block of unconsciousness, but as a nuanced journey with distinct phases and purposes, each contributing its own essential elements to the maintenance of health and well-being. As we observe them in their second sleep, profound and peaceful in the darkness of their northern night, we witness a mastery of rest that the modern world, with all its advantages, has yet to reclaim. In the heart of the Scandinavian winter, when the sun becomes little more than a memory glimpsed briefly at the horizon before retreating once more into months of darkness, the Viking people entered into a relationship with sleep that transcended mere nightly rest and approached something closer to the hibernation practiced by the bears that denned in the forests surrounding their settlements. During these darkest months, when night could stretch for 20 hours or more in the northernmost reaches of their territory, sleep became not just a recuperative necessity, but a survival strategy, a way of conserving energy and resources during the time when the natural world itself seemed to pause in frozen suspension. The transformation of sleep patterns as winter deepened was gradual but profound, beginning with the subtle lengthening of nights in autumn and culminating in the deep winter months when darkness reigned nearly supreme, creating conditions for human rest that modern people, with their electrically lit environments and climate-controlled homes, can scarcely imagine. As the days shortened and the nights grew longer, the Viking body responded with ancient wisdom encoded in its very cells, gradually extending sleep duration to match the available darkness. Until at the winter's peak, it was not uncommon for people to spend 14, 15, even 16 hours in the embrace of sleep and rest. This extended sleep was not a single unbroken period of unconsciousness, but rather an elaboration of the biphasic pattern practiced year-round, with both the first and second sleep periods lengthening to fill the expanded darkness, and the wakeful period between them taking on a different character, becoming a time of quiet activity in the darkness, rather than a brief interlude. The longhouse during these deep winter nights became a chamber of extended rest, with the rhythm of life slowing to match the sluggish pulse of the frozen world outside, creating conditions that modern researchers now recognize as a form of social and biological hibernation. The Vikings understood, through generations of experience surviving in one of the world's most challenging environments, that fighting against the natural rhythms of winter was not only futile, but dangerous, potentially depleting precious energy reserves needed to survive until spring's return. Instead, they embraced the darkness and the extended rest it demanded, allowing their bodies to enter states of reduced metabolic activity that conserved calories when food was scarce and physical activity was limited by weather and darkness. This was not laziness or depression, as modern sensibilities might interpret it, but rather a sophisticated biological adaptation to extreme environmental conditions. Inside the longhouse during these longest nights, the fire in the central hearth burned continuously, but at a lower intensity than during the more active seasons, maintained just enough to prevent freezing but not so vigorously as to consume the carefully hoarded fuel supplies that needed to last until spring. The resulting temperature within the dwelling hovered at levels that would seem uncomfortably cool to modern inhabitants, but which actually promoted the deep, restorative sleep that the Vikings required. For the human body sleeps most efficiently when the ambient temperature is cool, while the body itself remains warm under coverings. The extended darkness created unique conditions for the production and maintenance of melatonin, that crucial sleep hormone whose release is triggered by darkness and suppressed by light. While modern people struggle with disrupted melatonin production due to artificial lighting, the Vikings of winter experienced melatonin levels that remained elevated for the entire duration of the polar night, creating a biochemical environment that not only promoted sleep, but also provided protection against the depression and anxiety that can accompany extended darkness. Their bodies, bathed in this hormonal signal for months at a time, entered states of rest so profound that they bordered on the transformative. The diet during these winter months also supported the extended sleep patterns, consisting primarily of preserved foods that were dense in calories and nutrients but required little energy to digest. Dried fish, rich in omega-3 fatty acids, that supported brain health and mood regulation. Fermented dairy products that provided probiotics and easily absorbed nutrients. Root vegetables stored in cold cellars that released their sugars slowly. And small amounts of preserved meats that provided essential proteins and fats. This diet, born of necessity rather than choice, created ideal conditions for extended rest by providing sustained energy without the metabolic spikes and crashes associated with more varied fare. The social dynamics of the household also shifted during the long winter nights, with the extended periods of darkness creating opportunities for different forms of interaction and rest. The wakeful periods between first and second sleep might stretch to 2 or 3 hours, filled with quiet activities that could be performed in near darkness, the repair of tools and weapons by touch, the spinning of thread and weaving of cloth, the telling of stories that grew ever more elaborate as the nights lengthened. These activities, performed in the drowsy state between sleeps, took on a meditative quality that made them as restful as sleep itself. Children during these winter months slept even longer than adults, their growing bodies taking advantage of the extended darkness to produce the growth hormone that would fuel their development through the coming year. Parents understood intuitively what science would later confirm, that children grow primarily during sleep, and that the long winter nights provided an opportunity for accelerated growth and development that compensated for the more active but shorter sleeping periods of summer. The sight of children sleeping 12, 14, even 16 hours during the deepest winter was not cause for concern, but rather recognition of nature's wisdom. The psychological effects of this extended rest were profound and generally positive, contrary to what modern people might expect. Rather than leading to lethargy or depression, the long sleep of winter created conditions for deep restoration of both body and mind, allowing the Vikings to process the experiences of the active summer months, to consolidate memories and learning, and to engage in the kind of psychological integration that only comes with extended periods of rest and reflection. The dreams during these long winter sleeps were reported to be particularly vivid and meaningful, often providing guidance and insight that would influence decisions in the coming year. The Vikings also understood that different individuals required different amounts of this winter sleep, with some naturally needing more rest than others, and the communal living arrangements allowed for these individual differences without judgment or pressure to conform to a single pattern. The elderly might sleep less deeply, but for longer periods, dozing and waking throughout the extended night, while young adults might sleep with such profundity that rousing them became nearly impossible. These variations were accepted as natural expressions of individual constitution and life stage, rather than problems to be corrected. The gradual emergence from winter's long embrace as spring approached was as carefully managed as the entry into it had been, with sleep patterns slowly adjusting to match the increasing daylight, bodies gradually increasing their activity levels, and metabolism speeding up to match the demands of the coming season. This transition period was understood to be crucial, requiring careful attention to diet and activity to avoid the exhaustion that could come from too rapid a shift from winter's hibernation to summer's frenetic activity. The practice of extended winter sleep also served important social and cultural functions, creating a season of enforced togetherness that strengthened family bonds and allowed for the transmission of cultural knowledge through the long, dark hours. The stories told during winter nights were different from those of summer, deeper and more complex, taking advantage of the extended time and the receptive state of minds, softened by months of rest. Skills were taught through patient repetition in the darkness. Knowledge was shared in whispered conversations during the wakeful hours, and the bonds of kinship were reinforced through the simple act of sleeping side by side through the interminable nights. As we contemplate the Viking practice of winter sleep, we begin to understand that what might appear to modern eyes as excessive or pathological was in fact a sophisticated adaptation to extreme environmental conditions, a way of not just surviving but thriving in a world where winter darkness could last for months. Their embrace of extended sleep during these times represents a wisdom that our always-on, perpetually lit world has forgotten, that sometimes the most productive thing we can do is rest, that darkness has its own gifts to offer, and that working with natural rhythms rather than against them leads not to stagnation but to a different kind of vitality, one that emerges refreshed and renewed when conditions once again favor activity. When the great wheel of the seasons turned its face toward summer in the lands of the Vikings, bringing with it the phenomenon of white nights where the sun barely kissed the horizon before rising again in its endless circuit of the sky, the entire rhythm of sleep and waking underwent a transformation as dramatic as that which occurred in winter, yet opposite in every regard. During these brief months of endless light, when the sun at midnight merely dimmed to a golden twilight, before beginning its ascent once more, the Viking people faced the challenge of finding rest in a world that seemed to have forgotten the very concept of night, requiring adaptations both practical and cultural that speak to the remarkable flexibility of human beings in the face of environmental extremes. The approach of summer's perpetual daylight came gradually, heralded by the lengthening days of spring that seemed to accelerate as the season progressed, each sunset arriving minutes later than the last, until the very concept of sunset became meaningless in the northern reaches of Scandinavia. The Vikings watched this transformation with the same attentiveness they brought to all seasonal changes, knowing that their sleep patterns would need to shift dramatically to accommodate a world where traditional markers of day and night ceased to exist, where the body's natural cues for sleep would be overwhelmed by the persistent presence of light. Inside the longhouses during these white nights, a different kind of ingenuity came into play as families worked to create artificial darkness in a world flooded with light. Heavy coverings of wool and leather were hung over the smoke holes that normally provided ventilation, transforming them into barriers against the invasive brightness that would otherwise stream into the dwelling at all hours. Additional layers of material were added to the walls where cracks might admit light, and the entranceways were fitted with multiple coverings that could create a kind of airlock of darkness, allowing people to enter and exit without flooding the interior with unwanted illumination. The sleeping platforms themselves underwent summer modifications, with temporary canopies erected over them using wooden frames and heavy cloth, creating caves of darkness within the larger space of the longhouse. These sleeping alcoves, while blocking light, had to be carefully designed to still allow air circulation. For the summer months, brief though they were, could bring surprising warmth to the northern lands, and sleeping in completely enclosed spaces would quickly become unbearable. The Vikings thus became masters of creating darkness that breathed, shadows that could sustain life while shutting out the relentless light. The quality of sleep during these white nights was fundamentally different from the deep, extended slumbers of winter, becoming lighter, shorter, and more fragmented by necessity. Where winter sleep might extend for 14 hours or more, summer sleep compressed into perhaps 6 or 7 hours total, often broken into multiple short segments scattered throughout the day and night. The Vikings adapted to this pattern with remarkable grace, understanding that fighting against the light was futile, and that working with it, finding rest when and where possible, was the key to maintaining health and productivity during the crucial growing season. The biphasic sleep pattern that characterized Viking rest year-round underwent its own summer transformation, with the distinction between first and second sleep becoming less clear as people grabbed sleep in shorter bursts whenever opportunity and inclination aligned. A farmer might sleep for 3 hours in the early morning when a brief dimness fell across the land, wake to tend crops during the bright midnight hours when work was pleasant in the cool air, then sleep again during the heat of what would traditionally be afternoon. This flexibility in sleep timing, unthinkable in our modern scheduled world, allowed the Vikings to maximize both rest and productivity during the precious summer months. Children during summer adapted with the plasticity of youth to these unusual sleep patterns, often seeming to require even less sleep than adults, as the excitement of endless daylight and outdoor activities kept them in constant motion. Parents learned to enforce rest periods even when darkness would not come to aid them, creating quiet times within the household when children were required to lie still even if sleep eluded them, understanding that rest without sleep was better than no rest at all. These enforced quiet periods often occurred during the warmest parts of the day, creating a pattern similar to the siesta cultures of southern Europe, though driven by light rather than heat. The psychological effects of the white nights were as profound as those of the winter darkness, though entirely different in character. Where winter brought introspection and dreams, summer brought a kind of euphoria mixed with exhaustion, a heightened state of awareness that could border on the manic if not carefully managed. The Vikings developed cultural practices to cope with this light-induced altered state, including communal activities that channeled the excess energy productively, and social structures that prevented individuals from pushing themselves beyond their limits in the excitement of endless day. Work patterns during the white nights reflected the unusual sleep schedules, with the traditional boundaries between day and night, labor dissolving into a continuous flow of activity, punctuated by rest periods. Fishing boats might launch at what would traditionally be midnight to take advantage of calm waters and active fish, while farmers might harvest hay at 3 in the morning when dew made the cutting easier. This round-the-clock productivity was not sustainable for extended periods, which perhaps explains why the growing season in the north was so intense but brief, a burst of activity that took advantage of the endless light before the return of darkness brought more sustainable rhythms. The social dynamics of summer sleep were also unique, with household members often sleeping at different times as work demands and individual preferences dictated. The communal sleeping arrangements that provided such comfort in winter became more fluid in summer, with people bedding down wherever and whenever exhaustion overtook them. It was not uncommon to find someone napping in the hayfield where they had been working, or sleeping in the boat where they had been fishing, the boundaries between workspace and sleep space dissolving in the endless light. The Vikings developed various remedies and practices to promote sleep during the white nights, including the use of herbs and tinctures that promoted drowsiness, though these were used sparingly and with respect for their power. Valerian root, chamomile, and other soporific plants were gathered during their peak potency and prepared into teas or sachets that could be placed near sleeping areas. Physical exhaustion from the intense labor of summer also served as a natural sleep aid, with bodies pushed to their limits, finding rest even in the presence of light that would otherwise prevent it. The dreams of summer sleep, when they came, were reported to be different from those of winter. Shorter, more fragmented, but often more vivid and strange, as if the compressed sleep created a pressure that intensified the dreaming experience. Visions received during summer sleep were considered particularly significant, perhaps because they were rarer and required the dreamer to overcome the obstacle of light to receive them. These summer dreams often influenced important decisions about marriages, voyages, and other major undertakings planned for the following year. The transition between summer and winter sleep patterns required careful management, with the Vikings understanding that too rapid a shift could lead to exhaustion and illness. As the days began to shorten in late summer, families would gradually adjust their sleeping arrangements, removing some of the light barriers to allow the natural darkness to reclaim the longhouse bit by bit. This gradual transition allowed bodies to slowly readjust to longer sleep periods, preventing the shock that could come from suddenly trying to sleep for extended periods after months of abbreviated rest. The cultural memory of summer's brief darkness lived in the stories and songs of the Viking people, with tales of heroes who could work for days without rest during the white nights, and cautionary stories of those who pushed too hard and paid the price in madness or exhaustion. These narratives served both to celebrate the unique conditions of the northern summer and to transmit wisdom about how to navigate them safely, encoding in story form the practical knowledge needed to thrive in a world where the sun forgot to set. As we reflect on the Viking management of sleep during the White Nights, we see a people who understood that human biology, while remarkably adaptable, has limits that must be respected even as they are pushed. Their strategies for finding rest in a world of endless light demonstrate not just practical ingenuity, but a deep wisdom about the need for balance between activity and rest, light and darkness, waking and sleeping. In their acceptance of summer's abbreviated sleep, just as in their embrace of winter's extended rest, the Vikings showed an understanding of natural rhythms that allowed them to thrive in conditions that would challenge even modern people with all our technological advantages. In the flickering light of the longhouse hearth, as the evening meal draws to a close, and the household begins its nightly transition towards sleep, we can observe how the very foods that sustained Viking life during the day became allies in their quest for restorative rest during the night, creating a relationship between nutrition and sleep that modern science has only recently begun to understand in its full complexity. The Viking diet, shaped by the harsh realities of northern agriculture and the bounty of cold seas, contained within it a natural pharmacy of sleep-promoting nutrients that worked in harmony with their biphasic sleep patterns to create conditions for rest that many modern people, despite access to every conceivable food, struggle to achieve. At the heart of the Viking relationship with sleep-promoting nutrition lay the cold water fish that formed the cornerstone of their diet. Salmon swimming up the fjords to spawn, herring moving in vast silver clouds through the northern seas, cod pulled from the deep waters beyond the skerries, and mackerel flashing through the summer waves. These fish, living in waters so cold that their bodies required special adaptations to survive, were extraordinarily rich in the omega-3 fatty acids that modern research has shown to be crucial for both brain health and sleep quality. The Vikings, consuming these fish fresh, dried, smoked, or fermented, were unknowingly providing their bodies with the building blocks for the neurotransmitters that regulate sleep and mood. The preparation of these fish for consumption followed methods that actually enhanced their sleep-promoting properties rather than diminishing them, with fermentation processes creating additional compounds that supported gut health and, through the mysterious gut-brain axis that science is only beginning to understand, promoted better sleep. The famous fermented fish preparations of Scandinavia, while challenging to modern palates, represented a sophisticated understanding of food preservation that maintained and even enhanced nutritional value through the long winter months when fresh food was scarce. Beyond the gifts of the sea, the Viking diet drew heavily on whole grains that provided the complex carbohydrates necessary for the production of serotonin, that crucial neurotransmitter that serves as the precursor to melatonin. Barley, rye, and oats, grown in fields wrestled from the forest and tended through the brief growing season, were consumed as porridges, breads, and fermented beverages that provided sustained energy throughout the day while setting the stage for restful sleep at night. These grains, consumed in their whole form with all their fiber and nutrients intact, created a slow release of energy that avoided the blood sugar spikes and crashes that can disrupt sleep. The timing of grain consumption in the Viking household followed patterns that naturally supported their sleep cycles, with the heavier grain-based meals consumed earlier in the day when energy was needed for labor, while evening meals tended toward lighter fare that would not burden the digestive system during sleep. This intuitive understanding of meal timing, developed through generations of experience rather than scientific study, aligned perfectly with what chronobiology now tells us about the relationship between digestion and sleep quality. Root vegetables, stored in cool cellars dug into the earth beneath the longhouses, provided another crucial component of the sleep-supporting Viking diet. Turnips, carrots, onions, and the hardy rutabagas that could survive the northern climate were rich in vitamins and minerals that supported the body's sleep mechanisms, particularly magnesium, which modern research has identified as crucial for deep sleep. These vegetables, often cooked slowly in stews with meat and grains, created warming meals that promoted the slight drop in body temperature that signals the onset of sleep. The Vikings' consumption of dairy products, particularly in their fermented forms, added another layer to their sleep-promoting nutrition. Milk from their hardy cattle and goats was transformed through fermentation into products like skyr and various cheeses that provided not only protein and calcium, but also beneficial bacteria that supported gut health. The connection between gut health and sleep quality, mediated by the production of neurotransmitters in the intestinal system, meant that these fermented foods played a role in sleep that the Vikings could observe in practice, even if they couldn't explain the mechanism. Wild foods gathered from forest and field supplemented the Viking diet with nutrients often missing from cultivated foods, including herbs and mushrooms that possessed mild sedative properties. Chamomile growing wild in meadows, valerian root dug from shaded forest floors, and various mushrooms that fruited in the autumn woods all found their way into the Viking diet, often consumed in the evening as teas or additions to stews that promoted relaxation and sleep. The gathering of these wild foods was itself a practice that connected the Vikings to the natural rhythms of their environment, reinforcing the alignment between their lifestyle and the cycles of day and night. The consumption of meat in the Viking diet, while significant, followed patterns that supported rather than hindered sleep. The heavier meats like beef and pork were typically consumed earlier in the day when their protein could fuel physical labor, while evening meals might feature lighter fare such as fish or small amounts of preserved meats. This intuitive understanding of how different proteins affected energy and sleep states allowed the Vikings to maintain their strength while still achieving restful sleep. Honey, the only concentrated sweetener available to the Vikings, was used sparingly but strategically, often consumed in small amounts before sleep either dissolved in warm milk or fermented into mead. The natural sugars in honey, combined with its trace amounts of tryptophan, created a mild sedative effect that eased the transition into sleep. The Vikings' moderate use of this precious sweetener, reserved for special occasions and medicinal purposes, avoided the sleep-disrupting effects of excessive sugar consumption that plague modern diets. The practice of fasting, whether intentional or imposed by seasonal scarcity, also played a role in Viking sleep patterns. Periods of reduced food intake, particularly in late winter when stores ran low, actually enhanced sleep quality by allowing the digestive system to rest and promoting the cellular repair processes that occur during sleep. This cyclical pattern of feast and famine, far from being a hardship to be endured, may have contributed to the overall health and resilience of the Viking people. The beverages consumed by Vikings also supported their sleep patterns, with herbal teas made from local plants consumed in the evening, while ales and mead, containing natural sedative compounds from their fermentation process, were enjoyed in moderation as part of the evening wind-down. The absence of caffeine in the Viking diet meant that no chemical stimulants interfered with their natural sleep-wake cycles, allowing their bodies to respond to the cues of light and darkness without artificial interference. The communal nature of Viking meals added another dimension to the diet-sleep connection, with the social bonding that occurred during shared meals, promoting the release of oxytocin and other hormones that facilitate relaxation and sleep. The practice of eating together as a household, sharing not just food, but conversation and companionship, created a psychological state conducive to rest that no solitary meal, however nutritious, could match. As we observe the Viking diet in its totality, we see not a collection of individual foods, but a comprehensive nutritional system that supported every aspect of their lives, including their remarkable sleep patterns. The combination of omega-3 rich fish, whole grains, fermented foods, seasonal vegetables, and wild-gathered supplements created a dietary foundation that promoted both the energy needed for their demanding lifestyle and the rest required to sustain it. Their intuitive understanding of how food affected sleep, developed through centuries of observation and tradition, achieved naturally what modern people often struggle to accomplish, even with the aid of supplements and sleep medications. The lesson of the Viking diet speaks across the centuries to our modern struggles with sleep, suggesting that perhaps the answer lies not in pharmaceutical interventions, but in returning to a way of eating that honors the connection between what we consume and how we rest. In their simple yet sophisticated approach to nutrition, the Vikings demonstrated that the path to deep sleep might begin not in the bedroom, but in the kitchen, with foods that nourish not just the body, but the body's ability to find the rest it requires. As the first pale light of dawn seeps through the smoke holes of the longhouse, bringing with it the promise of another day of labor in the unforgiving northern landscape, we follow a Viking farmer as he rises from his second sleep, his body rested but ready for the physical demands that await, demands that will, by day's end, create the perfect conditions for the deep and restorative sleep that will follow. His movements in these early morning moments are unhurried but purposeful, each action part of a daily rhythm that has been refined through generations of experience into an almost perfect balance between exertion and rest, work and recovery, the spending and replenishing of human energy. The day begins even before full consciousness returns, with the body's gradual awakening from sleep proceeding in harmony with the increasing light, cortisol levels rising naturally to prepare muscles and mind for the coming exertions. Unlike the jarring transition from sleep to wakefulness that characterizes modern mornings ruled by alarm clocks and artificial schedules, the Viking's awakening flows naturally from the completion of sleep cycles, leaving him refreshed rather than groggy, energized rather than depleted. His first actions are simple but significant, stretching muscles that have been still through the night, taking deep breaths of the cool morning air, feeling the solid earth beneath his feet as he rises from the sleeping platform. The morning meal, consumed with the household gathered around the rekindled hearth fire, provides the fuel for the day's labor. Dense bread made from whole grains, porridge enriched with nuts and dried fruits, perhaps some preserved fish or cheese, all washed down with fresh milk or weak ale. This meal, substantial but not heavy, creates a foundation of sustained energy that will carry him through hours of physical work without the peaks and crashes that come from simpler sugars. The very act of chewing the coarse bread and thick porridge begins the physical work of the day, jaw muscles warming up for the greater exertions to come. Stepping outside the longhouse into the morning air, our Viking farmer enters a world that demands constant physical engagement, where every task requires the use of muscle and sinew, balance and coordination, strength and endurance. The walk to the fields is not a commute in the modern sense, but a gradual warming of the body, feet finding their way along paths worn by countless passages, legs stretching into their stride, lungs expanding to take in the clean air that carries the sense of earth and growth, decay and renewal. This transition from the enclosed space of the longhouse to the vast openness of the northern landscape serves to fully awaken both body and mind, preparing them for the day's labours. The work of farming in Viking Scandinavia was not the mechanized process we know today, but an intimate physical dialogue between human and land, requiring not just strength but skill, not just endurance but attention. Ploughing behind an ox demands constant adjustment of pressure and angle, reading the resistance of the soil through the wooden handles, leaning into the work when the earth is hard, easing back when it yields. Every furrow carved into the earth represents hundreds of small muscular adjustments, a full-body engagement that works muscles from calves to shoulders, core to arms, in a constantly shifting pattern that prevents the repetitive stress injuries common to modern specialized labor. The rhythm of agricultural work naturally alternates between periods of intense exertion and necessary rest, not from laziness, but from the wisdom of bodies that understand their own limits. After an hour of ploughing, a pause to rest the ox becomes also a moment for the farmer to stretch his back, to drink water from a leather flask, to survey the work completed and plan what remains. These micro-rests, integrated naturally into the flow of work, prevent the deep exhaustion that would interfere with sleep while still creating the beneficial fatigue that promotes it. As the sun climbs higher and the day warms, the type of work shifts to match the conditions, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of circadian rhythms and energy management. The heaviest labor is completed in the morning when energy is highest and temperatures coolest, while afternoon might bring lighter tasks such as repairing tools or tending to animals. This natural variation in work intensity throughout the day creates a wave pattern of exertion and recovery that aligns perfectly with the body's natural energy fluctuations, avoiding the constant high-stress state that characterizes much modern work. The social nature of Viking labor adds another dimension to its sleep-promoting qualities, for rarely does our farmer work entirely alone. Whether joining with neighbors to raise a building, working alongside family members in the fields, or collaborating in the complex tasks of harvest, the presence of others transforms labor from mere exertion into social engagement. The conversations that flow during shared work, the songs that coordinate group efforts, the simple pleasure of accomplishing difficult tasks together all contribute to a psychological state that promotes better sleep by satisfying the human need for connection and purpose. The variety of physical movements required by Viking daily life created a form of exercise far superior to modern gym workouts in its functional completeness. In a single day, our farmer might plough, working the legs and core, lift and stack stones for wall repair, building upper body strength, climb to repair roof thatch, developing balance and coordination, carry water and feed, functional strength training, and walk miles in the course of tending to scattered fields and checking on grazing animals, cardiovascular endurance. This constantly varied movement pattern worked every muscle group while avoiding the over-specialization that leads to imbalance and injury. The outdoor nature of Viking work exposed the farmer to natural light throughout the day, ensuring proper regulation of circadian rhythms and vitamin D production, both crucial for quality sleep. The bright light of midday suppressed melatonin production completely, creating a sharp contrast with the darkness of night that would trigger its release. This daily exposure to the full spectrum of natural light, from dawn's red rays to noon's white brilliance to dusk's golden glow, kept the body's internal clock perfectly synchronized with the external world. The mental engagement required by Viking work also contributed to better sleep, by providing the kind of satisfied tiredness that comes from problems solved and tasks completed. Reading weather signs to determine when to plant or harvest, calculating how much feed the animals would need through winter, planning the rotation of crops to maintain soil fertility. All these mental challenges, integrated with physical labor, created a holistic fatigue that encompassed both mind and body. This is vastly different from the mental exhaustion without physical tiredness that characterizes much modern work, and often leads to the frustrating state of being mentally tired but physically restless at bedtime. As afternoon gives way to evening, the intensity of labor naturally decreases, allowing the body to begin its gradual transition toward rest. The final tasks of the day, securing animals for the night, checking that tools are properly stored, ensuring that all is ready for tomorrow's work, serve as a physical ritual of closure that signals to both body and mind that the active portion of the day is ending. This gradual wind-down, so different from the abrupt transition from office to home in modern life, allows stress hormones to dissipate naturally, and relaxation responses to begin even before entering the longhouse. The physical tiredness that our Viking farmer carries back to the longhouse as darkness approaches is profound, but not depleting, satisfying rather than exhausting. Every muscle has been used, every system engaged, every capacity tested, but not overwhelmed. This is the tiredness that comes from living fully in a physical body, from using that body as it evolved to be used, from matching human capacity with human challenge in a dance as old as our species. It is a tiredness that the body knows how to resolve through sleep, unlike the complex exhaustions of modern life that often resist rest. The evening meal, consumed with appetite sharpened by physical labor, tastes better and digests more easily than any meal eaten in sedentary satiation. The simple act of sitting after a day of movement brings its own pleasure, muscles relaxing into stillness with the same satisfaction they earlier found in motion. The warmth of the fire feels more comforting to a body that has known the day's cold, the softness of the sleeping platform more welcoming to muscles that have worked honestly. Every comfort is enhanced by its contrast with the day's exertions. As our Viking farmer settles onto his sleeping platform, his body carries the perfect recipe for deep sleep. Muscles pleasantly fatigued but not strained, mind satisfied by problems solved and work completed, stress hormones naturally depleted through physical activity, and every system ready for the restoration that sleep will bring. The rhythm of labor and rest that has shaped his day now delivers him naturally into the arms of sleep, not as an escape from an unsatisfying life, but as the necessary and welcome counterpart to a day fully lived. In this ancient pattern of exertion and recovery, we see the blueprint for human thriving. Work that engages the whole person, rest that restores what work has spent, and the wisdom to honor both as essential parts of a life well lived. In the gentle darkness of the Viking longhouse, where the only light comes from the dying embers of the hearth fire, a newborn infant lies cradled against her mother's breast, beginning her lifelong education in the rhythms of sleep that will shape her days and nights for all the years to come. This education requires no formal instruction, no rigid schedules or sleep training methods, but unfolds as naturally as the turning of the seasons, transmitted through the simple act of living within a community that moves in harmony with the ancient patterns of light and darkness, work and rest, waking and sleeping that have governed human life since before memory began. From the moment of birth, Viking infants entered a world where sleep was not a problem to be solved or a skill to be taught, but simply a natural part of existence that flowed according to its own logic, integrated seamlessly with feeding, waking, and all the other rhythms of early life. The newborn, sleeping against her mother's body, feels the rise and fall of maternal breathing, hears the steady drumbeat of the heart that accompanied her throughout her months in the womb. and these familiar rhythms serve as the first and most fundamental sleep cues, more powerful than any artificial sleep aid could ever be. The practice of continuous physical contact between Viking mothers and their infants during the early months of life created conditions for sleep that modern attachment researchers now recognize as optimal for infant development. The baby, never separated from the warmth and comfort of human touch, never experiences the terror of waking alone that can create sleep disturbances lasting into adulthood. Instead, she drifts in and out of sleep throughout the day and night, feeding when hungry, sleeping when tired, always secure in the knowledge encoded in her very cells that she is safe, protected, loved. As the weeks pass and the infant's sleep patterns begin to consolidate, they do so not according to any imposed schedule, but in natural harmony with the household's rhythms. During the long winter nights, when the entire family sleeps for extended periods, the baby too learns to sleep for longer stretches, her small body responding to the darkness and the quietness of the household with deeper, more sustained sleep. During the bright nights of summer, her sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented, matching the patterns of the adults around her without any conscious effort to create this alignment. The communal sleeping arrangements of the Viking household mean that children from birth onward are immersed in a sea of sleep cues. The breathing of multiple family members creating a complex rhythm that entrains the infant's own breathing, the subtle movements and sounds of others sleeping, providing constant reassurance that all is well. The maintenance of warmth through shared body heat, eliminating one of the primary causes of infant sleep disturbance. This rich sensory environment for sleep stands in stark contrast to the isolation of modern nurseries, where babies must learn to sleep despite the absence of the very cues that evolution has programmed them to expect. As the infant grows into a toddler, her introduction to the biphasic sleep pattern happens without fanfare or difficulty, simply through participation in the household's established rhythms. She experiences the first sleep of evening as the natural consequence of darkness and the day's activities, wakes during the household's wakeful period to nurse or simply to be held and comforted, then returns to second sleep as naturally as breathing. This pattern, rather than being seen as a sleep problem requiring correction, is understood as the normal and healthy expression of human sleep rhythms. The Viking understanding of children's sleep needs was remarkably nuanced, recognizing that different children might require different amounts of sleep and that these needs might vary with season, growth spurts, and individual temperament. A child who needed more sleep was not labeled as lazy, but simply recognized as having greater sleep requirements, while one who seemed to thrive on less sleep might be given quiet activities during the wakeful periods, rather than being forced to lie still when sleep would not come. This acceptance of individual variation prevented many of the sleep struggles that arise when children are forced to conform to rigid schedules that don't match their biological needs. The integration of children into adult sleep spaces meant that bedtime was not a banishment or separation, but a coming together, a daily reunion of the family unit that reinforced bonds and created positive associations with sleep. Young children would lie between their parents or nestled against grandparents, absorbing through proximity the calm confidence of adults who understood sleep as a friend rather than an adversary. The bedtime stories told in the darkness, the quiet songs hummed by mothers, the gentle touch of a father's hand on a worried brow. All these created a tapestry of positive sleep associations that would last a lifetime. As children grew older and more capable of understanding, they began to participate more actively in the evening rituals that preceded sleep, helping to bank the fire, securing the animals, preparing the sleeping spaces. These activities served multiple purposes, providing physical activity that promoted tiredness, creating a sense of contribution to household welfare that satisfied psychological needs, and establishing clear transitions between the active day and the restful night. Through participation in these rituals, children internalized the rhythm of preparation for sleep that they would carry into their own adult lives. The Viking approach to children's nighttime fears and anxieties was both practical and compassionate, recognizing that the darkness could indeed hold terrors for young minds while providing the comfort and security needed to overcome them. A child who woke, frightened in the night, would find themselves immediately surrounded by the warmth and presence of family. Their fears soothed not through dismissal, but through the simple fact of not being alone. The stories of protective spirits and household guardians, while perhaps dismissed as superstition by modern minds, provided children with psychological resources for managing nighttime anxiety. The seasonal variations in sleep patterns provided Viking children with a natural education in flexibility and adaptation. They learned through experience that sleep was not a rigid constant, but something that flowed with the rhythms of the natural world, longer in winter and shorter in summer, deeper in full darkness and lighter when the midnight sun reigned. This early exposure to variability in sleep patterns created adults who could adapt to changing circumstances without the sleep anxiety that plagues those raised with rigid expectations. The transmission of sleep wisdom from grandparents to grandchildren formed a crucial link in the chain of cultural continuity, with elderly family members often taking special responsibility for settling young children for sleep. These grandparents, with their lifetime of experience in the rhythms of northern sleep, possessed a calm confidence that transmitted itself to the children in their care. The stories they told, the songs they sang, the simple presence of their aged bodies in the sleeping space all contributed to a sense of continuity and safety that promoted deep, restful sleep. Viking children also learned through observation and imitation the various remedies and practices that promoted good sleep. Watching their mothers prepare evening teas from chamomile and other herbs, seeing their fathers carefully arrange the fire for overnight burning, observing how adults manage their evening consumption of food and drink to promote rather than hinder sleep. This observational learning, far more powerful than explicit instruction, created adults who possessed an intuitive understanding of sleep hygiene that required no conscious thought to implement. The play patterns of Viking children also contributed to their healthy sleep, with the physical nature of their games and the outdoor environment in which they spent most of their time creating the same beneficial fatigue that adult labor provided. Children who had spent the day running, climbing, swimming, and engaging in the 1,000 physical activities of childhood came to their sleeping platforms genuinely tired in body as well as mind, ready for the restoration that sleep would bring. This natural fatigue, so different from the mental overstimulation without physical tiredness that characterizes modern childhood, created ideal conditions for deep, restorative sleep. As Viking children approached adolescence, their sleep patterns began to shift in ways that the culture accommodated rather than fought. The tendency of adolescents to stay wakeful later and sleep longer in the morning was not seen as laziness or rebellion, but as a natural phase of development that would resolve itself as adult responsibilities increased. This acceptance of developmental changes in sleep patterns prevented the conflicts over sleep that poison many modern parent-teen relationships and allowed young people to move through their natural sleep transitions without shame or struggle. The result of this comprehensive, lifelong education in sleep was adults who possessed an intuitive understanding of their own sleep needs and the ability to create conditions that promoted rest, regardless of external circumstances. Viking adults who had learned sleep patterns from infancy carried within them a deep biological knowledge that no amount of modern sleep science could improve upon. the knowledge of how to surrender to sleep when it came, how to accept wakefulness when it occurred, and how to trust in the ancient rhythms that had governed human rest since the beginning of our species. In watching Viking children naturally adopt the sleep patterns of their elders, we see the power of cultural transmission at its most fundamental level, creating not through instruction, but through immersion, a population that understood in their very bones the art of restorative sleep. As our journey through the nights of the Viking world draws to its close, like the slow fading of embers in a well-tended hearth that has warmed us through the long telling of this tale, we find ourselves returned to where we began, standing in the doorway of understanding between two worlds. The ancient world of natural sleep that the Vikings inhabited, and our own restless modern existence, where true rest has become as elusive as morning mist upon the fjords. The fire that has illuminated our exploration now burns low, its light dimming to that perfect gentle glow that signals not an ending, but a transformation, from the bright awareness of storytelling into the soft surrender of approaching sleep. Throughout our wandering in the darkness of Viking nights, we have discovered truths about human rest that shine like stars in the northern sky, constant and eternal, despite the centuries that separate us from those hardy people who understood sleep not as a problem to be solved, but as a gift to be received. We have seen how they welcomed the darkness as a friend, rather than fighting it as an enemy. How they allowed their bodies to follow the natural rhythms written in their very cells, rather than imposing artificial schedules that war against biological wisdom. In their acceptance of the night, in their embrace of communal sleeping, in their understanding of the sacred pause between first and second sleep, they achieved a quality of rest that we, with all our technology and knowledge, struggle to reclaim. The image of the Viking longhouse at night returns to us now with new meaning, no longer simply a historical curiosity, but a blueprint for understanding how human beings are meant to rest. We see again the family settled upon their sleeping platforms, wrapped in furs and surrounded by loved ones, their bodies generating shared warmth, while their breathing synchronizes in the ancient rhythm of communal sleep. We understand now that this was not primitive necessity, but sophisticated wisdom, a recognition that humans sleep best when they sleep together, that the vulnerability of unconsciousness is best faced in the company of trusted others, that the warmth of togetherness provides more than physical comfort. It provides the deep security that allows the nervous system to truly release its daytime vigilance. The biphasic sleep pattern that seemed so strange when we first encountered it now reveals itself as perhaps the most natural thing in the world, a rhythm that honors the ebb and flow of consciousness, rather than demanding an unnatural 8-hour block of unbroken unconsciousness. We have learned that the wakeful period between sleeps was not a disorder, but a gift, a time when the mind could process the experiences of the day, when quiet conversations could strengthen family bonds, when the tending of the fire became a meditation on the careful maintenance required by all things precious. In accepting wakefulness as part of the night's journey, rather than an interruption to be feared, the Vikings found peace where we find anxiety. The profound darkness that enveloped their world each night speaks to us across the centuries about what we have lost in our flight from the dark. We who live surrounded by artificial light, who never experience true darkness from birth to death, have forgotten that our bodies evolved in partnership with the night, that the production of melatonin and the cycling through sleep stages requires darkness as absolutely as plants require sunlight. The Vikings, sleeping in their cave-like longhouses where darkness was complete and enveloping, gave their bodies exactly what they needed for restoration, creating conditions for sleep that no amount of modern sleep aids can replicate. Their diet, rich in the foods that promote rest, the omega-3 fatty acids from cold water fish, the complex carbohydrates from whole grains, the minerals from root vegetables stored in earth cellars, provided their bodies with the raw materials needed for the production of sleep-promoting neurotransmitters. They understood intuitively what nutritional science now confirms, that what we eat during the day determines how we sleep at night, that the body cannot produce the chemicals needed for rest without the proper building blocks. In their simple but nutrient-dense meals, timed to support rather than disrupt sleep, they created a foundation for rest that began at the dining table. The rhythm of physical labor that filled their days created the kind of honest fatigue that modern life rarely provides. A tiredness of the whole person, rather than the fractured exhaustion we know too well, minds racing while bodies remain unexercised, stress hormones circulating without the physical activity needed to clear them. The Viking farmer returning from his fields, the fisherman home from the sea, the craftsman setting down his tools, all carried in their bodies the perfect prescription for deep sleep, muscles well used, problems solved through physical engagement with the world, and the satisfaction that comes from necessary work completed. We have seen how Viking children learned the art of sleep, not through rigid training, but through immersion in a culture that understood rest as naturally as breathing. From infancy, they absorbed the rhythms of bifurcated sleep, the security of communal sleeping, the acceptance of individual variation in sleep needs. They grew into adults who carried within them an intuitive understanding of how to create conditions for rest, knowledge that required no conscious thought because it was woven into the very fabric of their being from earliest memory. The seasonal variations in their sleep, from the long hibernation-like rest of winter to the abbreviated sleep of white summer nights, showed us a people who understood that fighting against natural rhythms was futile, and that wisdom lay in adaptation rather than resistance. They allowed their sleep to expand and contract with the darkness, trusting their bodies to take what they needed when conditions allowed. In this flexibility, this willingness to bend with the seasons, rather than maintaining rigid schedules regardless of natural light, they found a peace with sleep that eludes those who demand the same rest, regardless of season. As we prepare to leave this exploration and return to our own bright-lit world, we might ask ourselves what lessons we can carry forward from the Viking understanding of sleep. We cannot return to their world of communal longhouses and lives governed by natural light, nor would most of us choose to do so. But perhaps we can remember that darkness is not our enemy, but our oldest friend in the quest for rest, that sleeping alone in isolated boxes might not serve our deepest needs, that waking in the night might not be a disorder, but an invitation to quiet contemplation. Perhaps we can remember that our bodies still carry within them the ancient wisdom of bifurcated sleep, waiting patiently beneath our modern habits for us to stop fighting and start accepting. Perhaps we can understand that the perfect conditions for sleep are not created by temperature-controlled mattresses and white noise machines, but by lives lived in harmony with natural rhythms, by physical tiredness earned through honest labor, by the security that comes from sleeping near those we love. Perhaps we can recognize that in our quest to conquer the night with artificial light, we have conquered ourselves, banishing the very darkness our bodies require for true restoration. The fire in our imagined longhouse has now burned down to its last embers, glowing softly in the darkness, like the eyes of a friend keeping gentle watch. The household around us has settled into the deep quiet that comes when a story has been fully told and understood. The darkness that surrounds us no longer seems threatening, but welcoming. Not an absence, but a presence. Not an ending, but a beginning. It invites us to lay down our modern anxieties about sleep and rest as the Vikings did, simply, naturally, trusting in rhythms older than memory. As you prepare for your own rest tonight, wherever you might be in this bright and troubled world, perhaps you can carry with you some small piece of Viking wisdom about sleep. Perhaps you can dim the lights a little earlier, allowing darkness to begin its ancient work of preparing your body for rest. Perhaps you can resist the urge to fill every moment with stimulation, allowing some quiet time before sleep for your mind to settle like sediment in still water. Perhaps, if you wake in the night, you can remember that this too is natural, this too has purpose, this too is part of the great rhythm of human rest. The Vikings have taught us that perfect sleep is not a matter of perfect conditions, but of perfect acceptance. Acceptance of darkness, of natural rhythms, of our need for others, of the wisdom carried in our very cells about how to rest. In their northern world of extremes, they found the secret of profound rest not through fighting against nature, but through flowing with it, not through isolation, but through togetherness, not through rigid control, but through flexible adaptation. Their gift to us across the centuries is this understanding, that we already know how to sleep, if only we can remember to stop trying so hard and simply allow the ancient patterns to emerge. And now, as the last ember fades to black, and the complete darkness of the northern night embraces our Viking household once more, we too can release our grip on wakefulness and allow ourselves to drift toward whatever rest this night might bring. The story has been told, the wisdom has been shared, and nothing remains but to practice what we have learned. In the darkness that surrounds us, in the quiet that fills the spaces between heartbeats, in the warmth of whatever shelter holds us, we can find our own version of Viking sleep, deep, restorative, and as natural as the turning of the earth beneath the stars. Sleep well, traveller through time. May your rest be deep, your dreams be peaceful, and your waking be gentle. The Vikings have shown us the way. Now we need only follow the path they lit with their understanding. The fire dies down, the darkness completes its embrace, and in that completion we find not an ending, but the beginning of rest. As it was in the longhouses of the north 1,000 years ago, so it can be again tonight, if we only remember how to welcome the darkness and trust the ancient wisdom of sleep.